So welcome everybody to the Cryohub webinar. Thank you all very much for joining us today. I'm just going to share my screen, which hopefully you can now see. My job is firstly to introduce the project to you. So I'm going to start with a bit of background to the project and then we'll go on to the rest of the agenda. So my name's Judith Evans. I'm from London South Bank University, who are the coordinators of the Cryohub project. So, what is Cryohub? The project's all about developing cryogenic energy storage at refrigerated warehouses and using renewable energy to generate that energy storage. It's a Horizon 2020 project, which is under the large-scale energy storage area, and it's a 60-month project, which is due to finish at the end of this month. So what's the problem? Why are we doing this? Why we're doing that is that as we move forward, a greater proportion of power generation is actually being produced from renewable energy resources, and renewable energy sources don't provide stable and steady generation. So as the grid moves forward, there's going to be a need for energy storage to be able to use energy when it's needed. And energy storage, there's a lot of different methods of energy storage, chemical, electrical, mechanical, electrochemical and thermal. But Cryohub is liquid air energy storage, and it falls within the area of the mechanical energy storage area. So liquid air energy storage is not actually a new technology, but it's quite a promising storage technology. But one thing we know is that systems need to be very carefully designed to be efficient. And the idea behind the project was to integrate liquid air energy storage into refrigerated warehouses and food factories. Our thinking behind this was that often refrigerated warehouses and factories were in areas where renewable energy was cited. Quite often you see cold stores that have got the roofs covered in solar panels. You can see in the third picture down on the left a warehouse which has got solar panels on the roof. It's also possible in lots of these facilities, as they're in urban, in sort of semi-urban or rural areas, often it's possible also to site wind type turbines in these areas. So our thoughts were that there was the availability to renewable energy in these sites. And already cold stores were very aware of grid integration. They already do something which is called load shedding, where they switch the cold store off, often for periods where there's high grid demand. And so they're quite actually used to integrating their facilities into the grid. So we were looking at options where we can also provide energy storage, but also provide some cooling as well. So the benefits really are we're providing large-scale energy storage. So this is energy storage. This is not batteries. This is megawatts of storage. Very large energy storage is where liquid air really fits. And we're able to supply energy into the grid by storing the liquid air and then generating energy from it when there's when there's a need on the grid. Also, one of the things we can do is what's called peak shaving. We can remove the peak power requirement from the grid, because quite often when there's a peak power requirement, there's a need for quite inefficient power generation to come into the grid. So we can remove that inefficient power generation, provide some free cooling to the cold stores. We can decarbonise the electricity grid. And also there's the potential to become a hub for liquid air. So potentially we can do a lot more than just provide energy. We can also maybe provide fast freezing, maybe could also provide some liquid air for transport vehicles, such as is being done already by people like Air Liquide and the developments that Dearman made. Warehouse cooling, electricity generation, but also we could possibly sell some of the cryogen as well. So, maybe we can also make it into a whole hub rather than just doing one or two things. So in terms of the project itself, obviously you're going to hear throughout the workshop more about what was carried out within the project. But as a brief overview, these were the main activities that we carried out. We looked first at the opportunities and benefits of liquid air, and also about where renewable energy and warehouses were located, and whether there was overlap between where there was a need and a supply. We also did a lot of work on design, modelling and integration, because obviously we needed to look at the design of the system and try and design what we could as best. We looked at control systems and strategies, also at equipment. Originally, the equipment that we were going to use was going to be reasonably off the shelf, with some equipment provided by partners, but that changed somewhat throughout the project. For example, one of the partners who was going to supply equipment went out of business, and so we had to source equipment from other sources. And some of the equipment that we actually thought would be reasonably available proved to be less available than we thought and a bit more bespoke. But this was all about how we actually build a system. And so part of the project was really to understand how you can build a system, what the challenges are, what equipment's available, what needs more development. So we were also looking at the barriers to the uptake of renewables, and that's some of the work that will be presented later, business strategies and models, policy recommendations, and also as part of the work there's a demonstrator to show that the system can be built and operated, and we've got some results from the demonstrator as well to present. In terms of the partners, just briefly like to introduce you to the partners who are involved in the project, and you'll hear from many of these today. Quite a few partners from the UK, ourselves, London South Bank University, Cranfield, Carbon Data Resources, Institute of Refrigeration, University of Birmingham, PSU Tech, Eurek and Frigologics from Belgium, Domire from Poland, Technical University of Sofia from Bulgaria, INRAE, Air Liquide and the IIR from France, and Sena from Spain. So there's a combination of partners there that are doing, some of them are doing technical work, some of them are looking more at the policy, the finances, the behaviour about why technology may or may not be taken up. So this is the agenda for today. We've got really quite a packed agenda, so please do send in questions. I will try and get questions at the end of each presentation, but we have quite a crammed schedule and I may not be able to fit them in all the times. Otherwise, if there's questions, I'll try and include them in the discussion panel at the end. So I'll do my best to try and get as many questions as possible involved, but I must say we have a very tight schedule and most people only have 10 minutes for their presentations. So as Lisa said, if you've got questions, please do put them into the questions box. So also, if you wanted further information, we have information on the Cryohub website. And if you want information about this workshop, as Lisa said, the video of the workshop will be available and you can already download some of the presentations from the download box on your control panel. So thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the next presentation. So the next presentation is from Didier Colomb from the Institute of Refrigeration, and he's going to give a sort of background briefing on refrigeration and the environmental impact in a global context. So could I pass over to you now then, Didier? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. First, well, good morning. Good morning. I would like to present you, and perhaps next slide, please. Yes, after a short introduction explaining what we are doing as a sustainable development goals within the IIR, I would like to present you the various sustainable development goals in the sector and the cold chain for food as I think that there is an error in my presentation. Just a minute. Lisa?
I'm so sorry, Didier. That's sorry. I'm just going to fix that for you. That's my fault. So let me just quickly bring that up.
Okay.
Just bear with me, and I will find your presentation for you.
I'm very sorry because I have a lot of presentations in various seminars, and thus sometimes there are confusion. We are working a lot with the Institute of Refrigeration with various events, and thus, well, of course, I don't do exactly the same presentations in the various events. So I would prefer to have the right one for this event.
I'm just opening that up for you, Didier. I do apologize about that. Let me just double check that I actually have this. Okay, what I'm going to do, I am just going to have to pull something up. What I'm going to do, if it's okay, I'm going to quickly run out Konstantin's presentation while I pull up your presentation, and then we'll come back round to you if that's okay.
It's up to you. It's up to you.
Not a problem. Is that okay if I do that, Judith?
Yeah, thanks, Didier. Let's move on to Konstantin's because we can easily pop your presentation in a bit later if that's okay with you, Didier. So let's move on to the presentation that was going to be after Didier's. That's from Konstantin Fikin from the Technical University of Sofia in Bulgaria. He's going to be talking about the potential for adoption of Cryohub technology. He was very involved in the manager of the energy mapping and co-location work that I briefly discussed in the introduction. And so he's going to talk a little bit more about that work to you.
Hello everybody, I am Konstantin Fikin from the Technical University of Sofia, Bulgaria. About 6 years ago I had the privilege to act as the initiator of the Cryohub project, which has been retained by the EU and started in April 2016. The idea was to adapt the emerging technology of cryogenic energy storage for co-generating electricity and cold on the territory of refrigerated warehouses, thereby facilitating their refrigeration plants and enhancing sustainability of the electricity grids. Our consortium spent 5 years of intensive work on energy mapping, modeling, simulation, design, dissemination and publishing activities, as well as on building the technology demonstrator, which was a hard nut to crack. It was not at all easy to convert the project concept into equipment to be demonstrated. We had plenty of initial illusions and passed through several turbulences, but we learned a number of good lessons. Due to the dedication of our partners, especially the industrial friends from Dogmeyer, Frigologics and Air Liquide, this first of its kind project is approaching a successful end. In the near future, the patriots of this technology may also be remembered as pioneers. Let me now outline our work on warehouse and renewable energy mapping, a work package my organization was in charge of.
Let's start with some statistics. Each year, the European Union is spending about 400 billion euros to import 53% of its energy from outside sources. The food sector is one of the most energy-intensive industrial branches, but is known to be still quite conservative because of the huge use of fossil fuels against the quite limited employment of renewable energy resources. For instance, renewables account for some 7% of the energy used in food production, as compared with 15% of the overall energy mix. At the same time, fossil fuels amounts to 80% of the energy consumed by the sector, against the 72% of the overall energy mix. So it appears that the food sector as a whole is far to be green or carbon neutral. On this background, the energy consumed by the food cold chain has a huge impact on sustainability, given 40% of the global food output require refrigeration, and keeping in mind that 20% of the electricity consumption worldwide is spent for refrigeration and air conditioning purposes, including 8% for industrial refrigeration. So involving of renewables becomes a must and key factor for enhancing the sustainability of the cold chain sector. This slide shows some figures about the energy used by the refrigerated warehousing in the European Union. The figures are perhaps a little bit outdated, but gives a good insight into the amount of power consumed. For instance, we can imagine that a whole nuclear power plant is working to meet the energy demand of all refrigerated warehouses across the EU. The use of renewable energy in refrigerated warehousing has been considered as an extravagance in the past, but today it becomes more and more a routine. You can see very often solar PV panels on the rooftops of large refrigerated warehouses, similar to the example on this slide. The Cryohub project deals with cryogenic storage of renewable energy for cogeneration of both power and cold to assist the refrigeration plant of a refrigerated warehouse. So there are a couple of prerequisites to apply the Cryohub technology. First, we need availability of large refrigerated warehouses, and second, renewable energy sources in close proximity to the warehouses are, of course, needed. The aim of the study was to map the location and power consumption of warehouses consuming over 500 kilowatts of power on average, and to co-locate them with potentially useful photovoltaic and wind power capacities. As a first step to achieve this goal, we have developed an online mapping survey with 14 questions. The survey was published in 6 languages, including English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Bulgarian. Furthermore, we have elaborated a rewarding system for stakeholders to encourage cold chain operators to share with us their capacity and energy data. Contributing companies have been ranked as bronze, silver, and gold Cryohub champions, depending on the amount and the quality of information shared with the Cryohub consortium. The Cryohub survey was actively promoted via the established channels of governmental and non-governmental professional organizations, editorial boards, and sectoral networks. You can see here the impressive list of stakeholders organizations which were approached to exchange information about the Cryohub survey. However, the public response to the online survey turned out to be quite too modest, mainly because of the conservatism of the sector, the reluctance of cold chain operators to share their energy data, and the need for a much longer period for data collection. We have then decided to act in a proactive way and started collecting of warehouse capacity data from different available sources. For instance, online or printed publications of the Global Cold Chain Alliance, the European Cold Storage and Logistics Association, the Business Euro pages on internet, the UK Environmental Agency, the French Ministry of Environment, DG Santé of the European Commission, national cold chain associations, and many others. This was perhaps the most interesting part of the exercise, involving also a tremendous amount of work. If only location data was available, we used satellite imaging via Google to determine the dimension of each warehouse with known location, and then, based on the warehouse size, we were able to correlate it with the energy use, obtaining objective estimates of the energy consumption based on our previous research about the specific energy consumption of refrigerated warehouses of various types. The results obtained per country are systematized in this table. You can see that a total of 1,049 warehouses throughout the European Union were explored, consuming together 933 megawatts on average. Some 503 of these warehouses had an average power consumption over 500 kilowatts and spent 780 megawatts in total. After having the data collected, we have logically proceeded towards mapping by using the ArcGIS mapping software. So you can see on this slide how the large refrigerated warehouses are spread on the European map. Normally, they are widely distributed across the continent. However, the highest concentration of warehouses coincides with the most populated and the most developed regions of Europe, situated along the English Channel, which means southern England, northern France, Benelux, and northern Germany. We have compared the Cryohub survey with a similar survey of the Global Cold Chain Alliance in terms of refrigerated volumes discovered by both surveys. For 12 out of 7 representative EU countries, it turned out that we have found more refrigerated volumes, amounting in total to some 23 million of cubic meters. But we should also recognize that we use the results of Global Cold Chain Alliance and built on their strength. Also, their survey is not specifically focusing on Europe, but it is worldwide. This is another comparison between the surveys of the Global Cold Chain Alliance, the IC project, and the Cryohub project. Looking at this table, we can conclude that the Cryohub survey is the only international research endeavor which brings together capacity, geographical, and energy information along with Europe-wide mapping. With the active involvement of the European Association of the Renewable Energy Centers, we have also gathered data on the photovoltaic and wind penetration in the EU 28. This slide shows the locations of 3,200 solar photovoltaic installations along with 11,700 wind parks across the EU 28. It is interesting to mention that renewables are widespread throughout the European map, but they are mostly concentrated in the most populated and developed areas of Europe, and the refrigerated warehouses of large dimension are also concentrated there.
The luckiest warehouses can be seen in this couple of maps. The left map shows warehouses located in the proximity of wind energy parks across Europe. From the right side, you can see warehouses near solar PV installations. For ethical reasons, the company names are anonymized. In this way, we identified our industrial partner Frigologics at Lommel, Belgium, who are hosting the Cryohub Demonstrator, based also on their professional capabilities to innovate and their eagerness for sustainable cold chain technologies. Detailed information for the Cryohub prototype will be delivered in the next presentations.
Finally, I would not like to repeat the advantages of our mapping survey over similar studies existing so far. If you would like more details, let me call your attention to a publication by the Cryohub consortium listed on this slide. Thank you everybody for your kind attention. don't hesitate to contact me with any questions you may have.
So thank you very much, Konstantin, for excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I think we're now going to return back to the presentation from Didier from the IAR, who's going to be talking about refrigeration and environmental impact in a global context. So Didier, can I pass back over to you now?
Thank you very much. So now I will come back perhaps after all these figures to some very important challenges at an international level. Next slide, please. So after a short introduction about what we are doing within the International Institute of Refrigeration, I would like to present you environmental challenges and cold chain challenges particularly, which are really linked with the project. And afterwards, of course, a conclusion. Next slide, please. So we are a very old organization. More than 1 century ago, we were founded, and we are an intergovernmental science and technology-based organization, which mission is still the same: dissemination and promotion of knowledge on all refrigeration technologies and users. Next. So our key domains, which are very linked with the Sustainable Development Goals, are food quality and safety from farm to consumer, comfort in homes and commercial buildings, health products and services, low temperature technology and liquefied gas technology, energy efficiency, and the use of non-ozone depleting and low global refrigerants in a safe manner. So you can see that food quality is, of course, the first key domain, but also low temperature technology and liquefied gas technology and energy issues. Next. So our actions are to build databases, to publish documents, we are to organize conferences, we have working groups, we are involved in international, regional, and national projects, such as this one, Cryohub, which is a project financed by the European Commission. The European Commission is also an observer in our organization. Next. So, quickly, what are the environmental challenges? Clearly, climate change is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge of the 21st century. And as you certainly know, the Paris Agreement, which was in 2015, according to that agreement, we should not obtain more than plus 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level during this century, and if possible, not more than plus 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is a real challenge since we are already at about plus 1 degree Celsius. And it is a very difficult challenge for all the countries, including Europe. Moreover, we have thus a general objective, but no international constraints as we have, for instance, the Montreal Protocol regarding refrigerants. Each country has to determine its national determined contributions. And we clearly know that the contributions presented in 2015 are not enough to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. So, according to the decisions in 2015, all the countries shall present revised national determined contributions in 2021, end of this year, and works and negotiations are underway at the European level to determine first its own goal at the European, but also at national levels within Europe, and also the ways to do it. And clearly, Cryohub can be a way to do it. Next slide, please. Another thing which is very important to understand is that the refrigeration sector, including the cold chain, air conditioning, heat pumps, cryogenics, accounts for about 7.8% of global greenhouse gases emissions. Within this 7.8%, 37% are direct emissions and 63% are indirect emissions related to the production and transport of the energy consumed according to our data. Moreover, energy consumption by the refrigeration sector represents 20% of global electricity consumption. So we are very concerned by these European with these global climate change challenges, and refrigeration is clearly concerned by that. Moreover, the need for refrigeration is increasing dramatically, especially in developing countries because of a growing population, a more urbanized population, and also needs for development. And thus, the environmental impact of the refrigeration sector, and especially the cold chain, will also increase. Next slide. So it is essential to have a sustainable development of the cold chain regarding storage, transport, distribution, and of course also the food factories. For two main reasons. First one, and of course it is the main one, due to food needs. If lost food could be saved thanks to refrigeration, it could theoretically feed 950 million people per year. It represents more than the current number of people who are undernourished, about 850 million people, and 1/3 of the next needs. This problem of the undernourished people, but also the 2 billion people we will have more before the middle of the century. So it is clearly a challenge, and we will very soon publish a new informatory note dedicated to the carbon impact of these food needs. We already published another one, the role of refrigeration in worldwide nutrition last year, and of course you can see them on our website. I would like to also insist on the health needs, which need also so cold storage and the cold chain. According to the WHO, 40% of vaccines are lost because of poor cold chains in developing countries. And you see the case of the current pandemic. Vaccines are very necessary for health and for the life. Within the cold chain, storage is a key part. Next slide. And energy is a key issue. As Kostadin already told you, renewable energy, solar, wind, are constantly increasing, especially in Europe. And storing renewable energy is a challenge, and that was also presented by Judith just before. The objective of the Cryo project is to solve the problem of energy storage and improve the energy efficiency of cold storage facilities, which are two important aspects of the energy challenge, particularly in Europe. And of course, it is, I think it was normal that the European Union wanted to finance this project. It's clearly reaching the main challenges we have in the cold chain. Next slide. So, as a conclusion, I would like to insist on the fact that the Cryo project was an ambitious and difficult project, but it was also the case. It is also the case with innovative projects, and we have, of course, a lot of difficulties when we have innovative projects, but it was useful and for all our challenges in Europe. Cryogenics is a new interesting approach compared to more traditional ones, batteries especially, and once again, Judith presented the various kinds of technologies we could have to store energy. Cryogenics is not very well known, but it is an interesting technology for that. Cold storage is an important issue, not only in Europe. It was presented in Europe, but because we are an intergovernmental organization, international organization, I would like to add the fact that the end of the project is not the end of the story. Refrigeration challenges should be at the top of international and national agendas, especially in developing countries, and we are working for that. It is now recognized since 2019 at an international level, especially within the various United Nations organizations, as a very important challenge. One of the main challenges we have regarding climate change is related to the cold chain. I think that it is still not the case at national agendas. So it is a call for all of you. I mean, you have to help us to include the cold chain and energy storage in the new national determined contributions, which will be revised this year. I think that it is also a challenge for us to be able to include all our subjects in this in climate change challenges. Thank you. Next slide. So please visit our new IR website. You will see the various documents, the various figures I already mentioned. And of course, I am at your disposal for questions. Next slide. So thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much, Didier. That's a great presentation. Thank you so much. We are already getting very slightly behind time, so I'm going to move straight on to the next presentation. I'll try and collate the questions together so that we can answer a few at the same time. The next presentation is from Carol Bond from Carbon Data Resources and Jonathan Radcliffe from the University of Birmingham. They've been working on how people take up new technologies and why they might take up new technologies and the barriers, and also the policies that could be enacted to make new technologies be taken up. So can I now pass over to you, Carol, and you, Jonathan?
Hi, thank you very much, Judith. Thanks. So I'm going to, as Judith said, be speaking about drivers and barriers for the next generation of sustainability for cold stores, and particularly the role of policy in business environmental decision making. I will be passing over to Jonathan after I've spoken for a few minutes. So getting straight underway. There we go. So this gives you an idea of the research background of our part of the project. Basically, I undertook a number of investigations to look at the non-technical and more contextual barriers and enablers within the refrigerated warehouse and food processing sector, and specifically looking at how they influence low carbon sustainable working. So that was the kind of pretext of the research. You've heard some background already, so just a small amount of background about demand, looking at heating and cooling as being very large users of energy and producers of carbon. And if you look at the graph, the cooling, the green line on the graph is cooling, the red is space heating. Cooling demand is actually expected to grow 50 times by 2100, adding 100 gigatons of carbon to by 2050. So it's equivalent to half a degree of warming on its own. Therefore, the current approaches that we have are just not going to be enough to deal with that level of demand. I'm going to say a little bit about the sort of future landscape, starting sort of on a global level and then sort of focusing in. So last year we had, the year before last, we had the UN Climate Action Summit followed by COP25. And although COP25 itself was felt to be a little bit lacking in ambition, there were actually quite a lot of outcomes from the two activities. A number of pledges by countries to cut greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050. The EU has agreed a Green Deal and committed a lot of its budget to climate action. And in the actual COP25 meeting, the Climate Ambitions Coalition issued a commitment to net zero by 2050, which included 73 countries and over 1,200 other organisations, regions, cities, businesses, and investors, very crucially. So that's a kind of sense of the growing imperative for change and for action on the global climate issues. And just to kind of add to that, the global strikes, which you might remember began with Greta Thunberg in 2018, continued to grow. By September 2019. they were attracting more than 4 million participants, and they have continued online even through the pandemic during 2020. So there is a growing sense across society of the need to take action. Looking at the EU particularly and the future landscape there are some key aspects for the EU on surrounding energy dependence and driving for increased security and independence from energy imports, which means they want to be boosting their own production of renewable energy. The EU's clean energy package, which is now very well established, is trying to bridge the gap between coordinating between national and legal planning and permitting, and also focusing on putting in place a stable legislative framework so that it will facilitate the clean energy transition. And also it incorporates 8 different legislative proposals, including a market design initiative. So it has a number of aspects. The EU also has interactive targets, which are basically linking energy efficiency, where they're looking at a target of something like 32.5%, and the stretch targets that are now in place for renewable energy sources, production of renewable energy of 32% by 2030 across member states. So some stretching targets there, but the trends are showing that actually the increase in growth in variable renewable energy sources is going to be taking production up to, well, probably in excess of 36% by 2050. And there's also planned investment coming, which is investing in infrastructure, transmission and distribution systems, as well as key developments in storage. So all those things together are working in concert to move the agenda forward. Here in the UK, we've had a number of different commitments in the last couple of years. The net zero UK's contribution to stop global warming scenarios, which came out in May 2019, has been underpinned by the government's 10-point plan that came out in November last year, where some key issues around resource and energy efficiency and particularly electrification, so expanding renewables and low carbon power generation to electrify heat and cooling and so on, and also the commitment within the 10-point plan of advancing offshore wind. So all these things again are pointing in this direction. The research also took us into looking at, on the other hand, the things that are getting in the way. If you like, the common barriers to the targets for renewable energy generation across Europe. And these come under, there are a number of different main issues with sort of subheadings under each of them. So very common barriers come under political and economic frameworks, particularly the sort of lack of coherence in national renewable energy source policy making, and also poor access to finance and investment, and general uncertainty and instability of support schemes. The grid regulation and infrastructure, lots of issues across Europe, around lengthy and complex and costly grid connection issues, and of course insufficient grid capacity too. In addition, the administrative processes, again, complaints about complexity and costly planning and authorization procedures, the lack of clarity of the future design of the electricity market, and in some states, particularly negative public perception of renewable energy itself by the public and potentially sometimes by the political establishment as well. So the research then, started to look a little bit more at individual organisations. And organisations are made up of people. So we were looking at contextual barriers and enablers for making this change, this shift happen towards increasing the use of renewables, increasing the use of new technologies. And some of those issues are literally individual. They're about behaviour changes. They're about social practice theories. Some of them are based in linking that with organisational issues. And we particularly used a methodology called the Complementarities Theory, which looks at the links between personal skills-related company culture and sector-wide and beyond influences in actually helping or not helping to make organizational change happen. So when we're talking about introducing new technologies, new concepts, new approaches, all these things come into play. And if they're not all in line, then they get in the way. And we also looked at this from a system perspective, particularly looking at something called the Ecosocial technical regime, which is a multi-level perspective after a typology of change by somebody called Giels. And if I just run through this diagram briefly with you, at the top, you've got three basic levels. And what this model says is at the top, you've got the eco-socio-technical landscape, which is basically, if you like, the deeper, longer term, slower changes that happen. It's things like, climates, basically. So an example at the moment is that actually we have landscape developments that include things like the climate changes that we've been experiencing, and these can put pressure on the central part, which is what they call the regime, the eco-social technical regime. That's, if you like, the dynamically stable part in which we all function. So it comprises the market, industry, policy, technology, ecology, science, culture, and so forth. And it runs along in quite a stable fashion until something interrupts it. And something from the landscape, like climate change, can interrupt that and then can create basically windows of opportunity for new things to happen, for change to happen, for novelty ideas to come into play. And they come from this third level, which is called the ecological, social, and technical niche innovations level. And when something like climate change happens, it also influences the niche level. And so these small networks of actors, so they could be individual organizations or groups, or that actually get together and start, they're very adaptive, they're evolving, they're learning, they're linking together. And they are, if you like, sometimes the pioneers that Konstantin mentioned earlier. And they join together and they can, with these windows of opportunities, then potentially influence the breakthrough, if you like, into the regime and create change. So they are, they align, they come together, and they can break through because they can take advantage of those windows of opportunity. And if the regime changes, that can then influence again the landscape because of the changes that happen. So this kind of model is actually quite useful in looking at what things might, what things are in play, are changing, and what things might disrupt those activities. So it's been quite a useful model in terms of working with the issues that we're talking about today. The company research then, so digging down again into a number of interviews were undertaken with companies across Europe, different parts of Europe, and we were particularly looking at the barriers and the barriers to and the benefits of next generation sustainability measures, particularly looking at the integration of renewable energy sources and energy storage, as we've been describing in the rest of the project. And this just is there's a lot of text on here. It's just to give you an example of the feedback that we were getting from our different case studies. And there are some issues that were coming up for people as benefits or barriers, either within the company themselves or at a policy level, that were coming up repeatedly. And so some key benefits, for example, were around the contribution that could be made to company environmental or carbon targets, around the potential for energy saving through, for example, load shedding or peak shaving, around branding or supply chain pressure issues and helping to deal with those, and around issues of energy supply resilience. On the company barriers side, return on investment came up a lot, unfamiliarity of technology and being able to get internal and external support for that, and operational costs came up. And in terms of policy barriers, there were often seen as limitations and difficulties, particularly with the grid feed-in, as we were talking about before, including the support of local energy production over large-scale energy production when it comes to having access to the grid, and then the lack of incentives or uncertainty of incentives and things like feed-in tariffs. So that's a bit of an overview. There's more depth in the reports. And at this point, it's appropriate for me to sign off and pass over to Jonathan, who will go into some of the policy issues in particular in more detail, and also revisit again those benefits and barriers. So I'll say thank you for now.
Great. Thanks very much, Carol. And as Carol mentioned, I'm Jonathan Radcliffe. I'm a reader in Energy Systems and Innovation at the University of Birmingham. And we were looking more at the policy and system impacts of the Cryohub technology and understanding how it could be integrated within that sort of context and how policy could enable the large-scale deployment. So I was doing that with my colleagues at the university that you can see here. And our approach, firstly, was to understand the scenarios through which the countries in Europe would be going through in terms of a general energy system transition and how that might be varied across different countries. We'd understand the different policies that were being put in place to encourage new technologies to be deployed and how that might have an impact on their eventual deployment at scale. And then work with stakeholders, both those involved in the energy sector and refrigeration industry, to get more of a sense of what the barriers to them would be in terms of deploying this technology. And actually, after my presentation, we're going to go through a few polls to get some further feedback from participants on this webinar, and that'll feed into our final report at the end of the project in a couple of weeks' time. So we'd really value your input on that side of things. So the growth of renewables is expanding generally across Europe, especially for its contribution in the power sector. And we selected a few different countries to focus on in particular, so that we could get some understanding about how the different sources of renewables, according to maybe wind or solar, and the different industry makeup in each of those countries would have an impact on the deployment of the Cryohub technology. And you can see we took these countries to represent that sort of diversity across Europe. We've heard a little bit about already from Konstantin around the food sector and its importance to Europe and how the refrigeration infrastructure is growing across Europe. So we wanted to look at the electricity supply in each of the countries that we've selected, how the refrigerated warehouses were using power within those countries, and what the projected future demand for refrigeration would be, and combining that with an analysis of the emissions from the cooling sector, as obviously the end game is to reduce emissions at a global level from the refrigeration sector. So just to pick out Spain as one example, and we look at each of the countries in a bit more detail within the report, but this is fairly typical looking over the last 30 years or so. You can see an increase in the growth of, an increase in the generation from variable renewables, in this case wind at the bottom. So from the 2000s, we've had many factors of increase up to the present day, and that's been combined with a general decrease in the flexible generation from gas turbines or coal, for example, that can respond to demand quite quickly, and also a decrease in the proportion of electricity coming from baseload generation, such as nuclear. So this is causing some of the challenges on the energy system that energy storage can have a positive impact to, that Judith mentioned. So then looking at some of the refrigerated sector, we identified a number of warehouses in Spain and what the projections for that would be over the next decade. And we took this analysis over a number of countries and could see that the deployment of the Cryohub technology would have the most value in countries where there are a large number of refrigerated warehouses and a high level of renewable generation. And in particular, the UK and Spain were found to be the most promising candidates for early deployment of the Cryohub technology. So that's a useful guidance when we're seeing where the best candidates would be for the first set of deployment. So once we can identify that, it's about enabling the deployment through different mechanisms, and we're particularly interested in the policies that would enable that. And we could see from a review of different storage policies from across the globe what worked and how that's related to the different systems within those countries. So we went beyond Europe in this case, looking at policies, a few places in Europe, Germany and the UK, but then also looking at other large and growing markets for energy storage in the US, Japan, Australia and South Korea. And that would help us identify what the key factors were in that growth of energy storage that could be replicated in other countries. And what we find is that the approaches used in different countries are very context dependent. So it will vary according to the energy system and also the government policies, including their attitude towards industrial strategy and whether they're prepared to subsidize companies to deploy new technologies. And I think an important distinction then for governments is whether they introduce policies that are specific around a technology and they look to target subsidies, for example, on batteries or in California around thermal storage, or whether they have more technology neutral policies. And we can see some of that playing out in the UK, where a general market has been opened up that acts as a subsidy or as incentives for energy storage to contribute towards that market. And we can see various examples of those policies, either technology specific or neutral, described here. And that's helping us create this policy typology for energy storage that we're relating into the deployment of the technology to see which is most successful under different circumstances. And putting that on sort of in tabular form at the bottom here, you can see various different factors, whether there's high renewable generation in the country, whether the investment is directed towards public or from the private sector, and some of the other policy environmental factors, such as whether there's regulation that is mandating energy storage. And you can see different countries are going down different approaches according to their context. But I think one of the important elements that comes out is that we need to create a holistic innovation system that values the contribution of new technologies in whatever context, and actors across the policy and private sector and research and development are working together towards common goals. Just briefly, you can see how we correlate the increase in renewables with an increase in energy storage in Germany and the UK. And I'll just get on to the stakeholder engagement finally, where we were interested in what the barriers would be to companies in terms of implementing such a technology. And I think that the key messages coming out of that were that the cost is critical, as you'd imagine, for a business. It's whether it adds to the bottom line, but also how well the technology integrates into their existing business from a technical point of view as well. And Carol has explained some of those outputs already. So that in terms of tackling the barriers to deployment, decreasing the cost perhaps through different subsidies would be appropriate, and lowering some of the barriers to implementation that would allow the technology to deployed at scale within the different firms. And there's an important role for R&D to enable that. So just the key messages from our work. The climate change energy policies will be important towards deployment of the technology, and the increase in refrigerated warehouses across Europe. So we're sort of creating a perfect storm for the development and deployment of the Cryohub technology, but it needs a number of non-technical interventions to allow that, given that it's a new and emerging technology. The costs need to come down and some of the barriers overcome, and that can be done through a combination of the technical R&D alongside policy that can help reduce costs in the longer term. So that's the end of my presentation. Happy to speak further, but look forward to your inputs through the discussions and through our polling. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you, Carol. Both fascinating presentations. We're now going to go on to some of the polls and questions. So, Carol, I think you're going to manage those.
Yeah, I am.
I will pass back over to you.
I think Lisa and I are going to do it as a double-hander. So I think, Lisa, you're going to put, basically, this is the opportunity for everyone attending to say something about what their feelings are about these issues. So we've got a few questions prepared that we'd invite you to give your answers to. I will read them through a couple of times, so there'll be time for you to have a look and decide what it is that you would like to say. The first one's a very simple question. So, Lisa, if you could perhaps put the first poll up. That's lovely. So this is really just finding out a little bit about yourselves. So if you could indicate one from the following list, what sector do you represent? Is it private sector or industry? Is it the not-for-profit sector? Is it academia or government or regulator? So I'll go through those again. Which sector do you represent? Is it private sector or industry, a not-for-profit organisation, or are you an academic, or are you involved with government or regulation?
Okay, we have about 53% of people who have voted. So if you haven't filled the quiz or the poll in yet, would you please do so? We will be closing the poll in about 10 seconds, if that works for you, Carol.
Yeah, that's fine for me. So any final thoughts? That's lovely.
Okay, I'm about to close the poll. So if you haven't already voted, you need to do so right now. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll and just share the results.
Okay, so we have overwhelming majority of private sector and industry individuals, which maybe is not at all surprising, but also a good smattering of academics and some not-profit organisations and non-profit organisations, which is great. And a few government regulators. Great, so that's a nice mix. Good to know that. That was the easy one. So the rest are equally easy, but they are just your opinions, remember, so you're very free to say whatever you want. So the next question, please, if you would, Lisa. And now we're thinking about the topic for today. Which are the two, so we want you to click 2, which are the 2 most important issues regarding the generation and use of energy for your business? So we've got, it says select all that apply, select 2, please, that apply from the list below. So the list is accessing new or additional revenue streams, lowering cooling demand, improving the reliability of your supply, reducing your environmental impact in terms of carbon emissions or pollution, for example, green branding and the promotion of sustainability. So I'll go through that again. Which are the 2 most important issues regarding the generation and use of energy for your business? The first option is accessing new or additional revenue streams, lowering cooling demand, improving the reliability of your supply, reducing your environmental impact in terms of carbon emissions and pollution, etc., green branding, and the promotion of sustainability. Has everybody selected their two most important issues from that list?
Okay, we still do have a few votes rolling in, so I'm going to leave the poll open probably for about another 10 seconds.
That's lovely.
So if you haven't already voted, please do so. Okay, we have no more votes coming in, so I'm going to close the poll.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's really interesting. So a lot of you have said that reducing environmental impact is a key issue for your business, which is maybe not entirely surprising. But the second most important is accessing new or additional revenue streams. So that's a really interesting result, because that very much links to the topics that we're talking about today, and the topic of this research and the opportunities it presents. I would say about equal or lowering cooling demand and improving reliability of supply. And then also somewhere between the two, we've got green branding and the promotion of sustainability. So recognizing that there are supply chain issues here, and there's increasing pressure and potential and opportunity for being able to present yourself as a truly green brand. So that's really useful. Thank you very much. Very interesting. The next poll, if you would please, Lisa. And this one is about new technologies and deployment of them within your organization. So again, if you could check just two of these, just two of the following list. Which are the two most important factors that affect decisions on the deployment of new energy technologies in your business? So which are the two most important factors that affect decisions on the deployment of new energy technologies in your business? And the options are capital expenditure, impact on running costs, integration with existing technologies and processes, lack of understanding of the new technology, maturity of the technology. So lack of understanding of a new technology is obviously something to do with how your organization feels about your understanding of it, and maturity of technology is well proven it is. So I would like you to indicate the two most important factors from that list on the deployment of new energy technologies in your business: capital expenditure, impact on running cost, integration with existing technologies and processes in your business, lack of understanding within your business of the new technology, or maturity of the technology.
Okay, so you've got about another 10 seconds to vote. I think most people have already voted, but you just get a few more seconds to get those votes in. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now, Carol, and share the results.
Lovely. And as if by magic, there they are. So capital expenditure is the most important of the issues or factors for this group, along with, very closely followed by, integration with existing technologies and processes. Not far behind is the impact on running costs, but less important for many of you is either the maturity of the technology or whether you inherently understand it right now. So it's much more to do with how well does it integrate, how much does it cost, and how much does it cost to run. So great, interesting results there. Thank you very much. And the next poll, please. We've just got a couple more for you. This one's quite quick. What is your attitude in your business or organization to testing or demonstrating pre-commercial energy technologies? Is it enthusiastic, reluctant, or neutral? And you're just selecting one from those options. So what would you say the attitude was in your organization to testing or demonstrating pre-commercial energy technologies? Would you say the attitude is enthusiastic? Is it reluctant? Or is it neutral, do you think? neither one or the other. And just select one from those three.
Okay, we still have a few votes coming in, so I'm going to give you another sort of 10 seconds just to do those final votes.
I got the urge to do that clock from Countdown, you know.
It is a very, very catchy tune.
It is a very catchy tune.
Okay, so you've got a couple more seconds. Okay, we haven't had any votes come in the last moment or two, so I'm going to close this poll and just quickly share the results with you, Carol.
Overwhelmingly enthusiastic. What a lovely result. Good to hear. Some people are neutral, and a few are reluctant, and there could be all sorts of reasons for that. But I think that there's an overwhelming majority who are enthusiastic towards the idea of new emerging pre-commercial technologies, energy technologies. Lovely, thank you. And the last but one question: are you, if you could, Lisa, thank you. Are you aware of any benefits that can result from energy storage? Again, this is a very brief answer. You just select one from yes, you are aware of benefits that can result from energy storage. No, you're not, or you're not sure. So it'll be one of the three. Are you aware of any benefits that can result from energy storage? Yes, you are aware. No, you're not, or you're not so sure.
No problem. We still have votes coming in, so I'll give a few more moments just to get those votes in. So you've got about 20 seconds to get those votes in.
You've got plenty of time. Just select the one from the three options.
Okay, I'm going to close that poll now and just share the results.
And yes, you are. Most of you are aware, a few not so sure, but most of you are aware of the benefits that can result from energy storage. That's great. Thank you very much for that. And the final question for this section, if you could please, Lisa. So finally, what is your attitude to third-party investment in and or management of new technologies in new energy technologies in your business? So I'll read that again because I didn't read it very well the first time. So what's your attitude to third-party investment in and or management of new energy technologies in your business? That's much better. So it's again thinking about the attitude in your organization. Is it enthusiastic, reluctant, or neutral? So you're just selecting one. So we're looking at the attitude to third parties coming in and investing in new energy technologies or potentially managing them within your business. What would your attitude be to that? Is it enthusiastic, reluctant, or neutral?
Okay, so about 53% of you have voted, so I'll just leave this poll open for a little while. Again, we'll give you sort of maybe another 10 seconds just to have a think about what your response to that question would be.
So you might already have third parties involved with investing in or managing some of your technologies, or you may not. But what do you think your general attitude would be, or the attitude of your business? Enthusiastic, reluctant, or neutral?
Okay, we haven't had any votes come in a little while, so I'm going to assume that anyone who would like to have voted has voted. So again, I'm going to close that poll and just share the results with you.
Well, generally, we have a majority that are enthusiastic, a few, 11% that are reluctant, and about a third of you are on neutral to the idea. So that's very, very helpful. Thank you very much indeed for your participation in that, all of you that did. Very helpful, very informative, and we hope it was informative for you as well. So thank you for your interaction there, and we're going to move on to the next section.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Jonathan. It's a great session, and I think we've got some more questions a little bit later as well for you. So the next session really concentrates on how the Cryohub technology was developed. We possibly have a couple of minutes spare before going to that section, and I have got a couple of questions that have come in. One of them is for you, Carol, so I'll maybe go to that one first. There's a question from Greg Arrowsmith. He was asking and saying about the 50% increase in cooling demand between now and 2100. And he was saying that really a lot of that is probably due to air conditioning and, you know, maybe isn't applicable to the Cryohub technology. But I mean, maybe Carol, you can comment, but I'd also say as well, it's maybe not just air conditioning, it's also middle and low income countries coming into the mix and actually increased requirement for cooling, which, you know, is really increasing in those countries. So you're talking about India, Africa, parts of China, you know, the need for cooling is accelerating incredibly fast in those countries. And I do agree with Greg that air conditioning is a big part of it. But Carol, did you want to comment any more? Sorry. Well,
no. I think you've mainly covered it, and I would agree with everything you said. And there is an element that is air conditioning. I quite agree. But also there's, you know, looking at the need to keep food cool when we've got changing climate and a heating climate. And the need of keeping medicines cold and so forth. So I think that will increase, and all of it increases with an increasing population. So I think there are a number of factors at play there. I don't think it's just one thing, and it was all lumped together. I agree. It wasn't brought out into lots of different sections. But yes, your point's taken. But I do think there's an awful lot to do with the cold chain in there as well.
But I also think as well, I mean, you can make a case that there is going to be a lot of, through wall air conditioning in the future, and that's where some of the market will go. But, you know, if we were actually smart, we wouldn't be actually doing that sort of cooling. We'd be looking at district cooling or centralised cooling, and therefore energy storage does become much more important, and it can be applied much better as well. So, you know, a lot of the work that's ongoing now and, you know, we're becoming increasingly involved in is, you know, trying to make, these countries that are coming on board and using more and more cooling, trying to stop them, prevent them repeating the same mistakes that have been made in lots of developed countries. So,
absolutely.
There are some huge opportunities there to try and make things better in the future. Thanks, Carol. There is one other question which I think really came in for me, although it could also be answered by perhaps other people, which was from Anton Ergenokov. Sorry if I've totally mashed your name, which was asking about the equipment that we had to source, because we started off with a manufacturer for turbines. We had to go outside the consortium to get turbines. In the end, we had some issues with heat exchangers, which we thought also were going to be provided within the consortium. I had to get from outside. And the other issue with the project is we were really heavily constrained by the amount of money we had. We seriously had constraints on what we could actually purchase for the demonstrator. So, you know, things change throughout the project, but often they do. So I think now we'll pass on to the next part of the presentation. Please note, by the way, we do have a comfort break at about 12:20. So you'll be able to take a quick break there and grab a cup of coffee, because I do realise we've got a lot of presentations. It's quite a heavy workshop. So the next presentation is from my colleague Daniele Negro, who's also from London South Bank University. He's been heavily involved in modelling and helping the design of the system. And his presentation gives you a bit of background on the modelling work that was carried out within the project. So, Daniele, can I pass over to you?
Good morning. Here is Daniele Negro from London South Bank University, LSBU, presenting the work on the modelling of the Cryohub system at the Cryohub online workshop on the 17th of March 2021. So, the Cryohub system, as initially envisaged, was supposed to use a liquefaction process to liquefy air during off-peak times or high renewable energy generation times into a cryogen. The cryogen would then be stored and later used via a pump in an evaporator, feeding back some of the cold energy to the liquefaction process and evaporating liquid nitrogen while doing that. Additional cold energy will be provided to the cold store warehouse for cooling purposes, and then the gaseous nitrogen at this point will be expanded through a series of turbines with additional heat provided both before the inlet to the first stage and then interstage. This heat will be the heat coming from the liquefaction process and being stored in a hot store material. So let's go to the Cryohub system as deployed. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough funds for a liquefactor, and therefore we had to resort to a high pressure liquid nitrogen storage tank at 15.36 bars absolute pressure. This liquid nitrogen will then be fed to evaporator. The evaporator will be providing some of the cold to the cold store warehouse directly or indirectly via heat transfer fluid, and some of the cold then will be possibly stored in a cold energy store material for later use in the cold store warehouse or for other purposes. We'll see about that later. So at this point, on the outlet of this evaporator, we would have high pressure, about sub-ambient gaseous nitrogen. At this point, we would have 3 stages of expansion after the evaporation, providing electricity directly back to the grid. As the inlet to the first turbine is sub-ambient, then the outlet from the first turbine and the subsequent stages will be at relatively low temperatures. Therefore, we could extract some of the cold and feed it back to the cold store warehouse. So the cold is extracted interstage between the first and the second stage of expansion, and then between the second and the third stage of expansion. As you may imagine, the volume of these heat exchangers would increase with lower and lower inlet pressure from the cold gaseous nitrogen, and therefore on the third stage of expansion the pressure will be about ambient, meaning that we will need a much larger volume heat exchanger to transfer pretty much the same amount of heat as the interstage heat exchangers. So this will prove uneconomical, and therefore we decided to drop the heat exchanger. So let's go to the crunching numbers. So after talking with the heat exchangers manufacturers, we had an initial performance bid from them, and we calculated with the pressure drops provided that the inlet pressure to the first stage would be about 14.7 bars absolute pressure at -7.5 Celsius turbine inlet temperature. On the outlet, as there is expansion, then the temperature will drop to about -50 Celsius for pretty much all stages, with the pressure dropping about 2.3 times for each stage. The pressure ratio being about the same between the 3 turbines, meaning that the temperature on the outlet given the same inlet temperature will be similar, with a relatively small pressure drop interstage. The turbines efficiencies from the performance bid from the turbines manufacturer were estimated to be 78.7% for the first stage, 80.9% for the second stage, and 74.2% from the third stage at nominal conditions. So the energy output from this system will be about 130 kilowatts of cold energy from the evaporator, being split up at about 18.5 kilowatts of cold energy being fed directly to the cold store warehouse, or indirectly via a cold energy storage medium storing about 110 kilowatts of cold energy at minus 163 Celsius. The heat exchangers will be providing about 18.5 kilowatts of cold energy via a heat transfer medium to the cold store warehouse, this medium being ammonia, pretty much. The turbines will be providing about 15.5 kilowatts of electricity fed back directly to the grid. And these will be at nominal conditions with the previous temperatures and pressures on the inlet of the heat exchangers. So, when calculating the performances of the system, one will need to account for the specific liquefaction work per unit of liquid nitrogen being used, and that we can calculate relatively easily with a liquefaction system model, and that was estimated to be about 0.6 kilowatts hours per kilogram of liquid nitrogen. From the cold being fed back to the cold store warehouse and the electricity, we will get about 0.065 kilowatt hours per kilogram of liquid nitrogen, and that would equate, when you divide the two, to about 11% round trip efficiency. Now, if we add a liquefactor, then we could feed back this cold energy being stored at a very low temperature here back to the liquefactor, and therefore decreasing the liquefactor work input significantly to 0.267 kilowatt hours per kilogram of liquid nitrogen. At the same time, the specific energy output would decrease because we wouldn't be feeding back this very cold energy to the cold store warehouse. We wouldn't be using that at fairly low COP because of the temperature, and therefore the specific energy output would decrease, but not as much as the specific liquefaction work. So, dividing the two means we would estimate a round-trip efficiency of about 13.7%. And this is for nominal heat exchangers and turbines performances. So, this is the end of the presentation. I am Daniele Negro from London South Bank University, and you can contact me at these coordinates. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's very that the quality on the presentation sound wasn't that great for everybody, so apologies about that. We're now going to move over to the next presentation, which is from Denis Leduc, who is from INRAE in France, and he's going to be talking about the thermal storage technologies, because as many people have already mentioned, being able to store heating and cooling is quite an important part of a liquid air energy system. So, Denis, over to you.
Thank you, Judith. So I'm Denis Leduc from INRAE. So in the previous presentation by Daniele, you could notice that liquid air energy storage process does not only store and produce electricity, it also produces and uses heat, and also produces and uses cold energy. So in order to not to waste these energies and to have the best global efficiency of this process, it is necessary to have the best use of all these energies produced. For example, a part of the cold energy that is produced can be used for cooling a refrigerated warehouse. This was the idea behind the Cryohub project. The very low temperature energy recovered from liquid air evaporation can also be used for the liquefaction process. So to do this, it's necessary to use a few thermal energy storage devices and use thermal storage technology. So it's important to understand that in this process, we have a liquefaction process that involves a succession of compression and cooling down steps. At each step of compression, there is some heat that is produced, and then to cool down the fluid during the process, we also need cold energy. Inversely, during the electricity generation, the liquid air is expanded, and that liberates a lot of cold energy at very low temperature. So this process produces cold energy. The generation process can also use heat to increase the efficiency of the turbines. So the liquefaction and generation processes can be very complementary, but it is only possible to take advantage of this complementarity by using thermal energy storage devices. Why? Because liquefaction and generation never occur at the same time. So it's necessary to temporarily store the heat and the cold energy. So thermal storage, in fact, heat and cold storage have a key role in a liquid air energy storage system. Just to give an idea of the importance, the storage and recovery of cold energy during the expansion process can until double the round-trip efficiency, so the global efficiency of the energy storage process. And also, recycling heat of compression can also improve a lot the global efficiency. So thermal storage is really essential in this kind of system. The difficulty here is that we have to deal with cryogenic temperature, and there are not so many technologies that can be used there. A possibility is to use packed bed technology with a storage media which is adapted to this level of temperature. So a thermocline packed bed is basically a tank filled with a selected material. Hot fluid and cold fluid are separated by buoyant forces. There is a thermal gradient that is relatively flat and that moves up and down depending if we are charging or discharging the tank. For example, to store cold energy, the cold fluid will be entering by the bottom of the tank and will leave by the top. When the fluid stops flowing through the tank, the gradient stays as it was due to natural convection. The material that you can use in this process should be selected first for its capacity to store energy with a high density, a high heat capacity, and if possible, low cost. The most used material for cryogenic temperature is gravel or quartzite. We did some tests in Cryohub using this material, and we also tested glass beads. These two materials have relatively similar energy storage density, but the advantage of glass beads is much lower pressure drops. So what happens in this tank? Mostly, the most important transfer mechanism inside the tank is convection between the fluid and the solid. Conduction in the gravel is usually neglected. So with this assumption, the energy balances for fluid can be written as they are presented here. They are relatively simple equations. In the temperature is assumed to be constant at the inlet. It can be even solved analytically. If not, it can be solved numerically. So, but these equations neglect a few phenomena like conduction, thermal losses, They also assume uniform velocities through the bed and use some parameters difficult to estimate, like convection heat transfer coefficient. So it was really necessary to do some experiments, do some tests with this technology, and we did laboratory scale prototype. For this, an experimental unit was built in order to assess the thermal and hydraulic behavior to characterize the efficiency of the storage and recovery processes, and also to evaluate the thermal losses and their impact on the behavior and the efficiency. The prototype was a tank filled with 150 kilo of glass beads and used nitrogen as a fluid. This device was equipped with sets of thermocouples, one at the center and another set at the edge of the tank. So what was the main outcomes of those tests? The charging process takes between 40 minutes to 120 minutes to full charge. The discharging process is longer, approximately the double of time. The temperature gradient was 1/3 of the bed height, which was similar to the size estimated by the model. A difference between the model and the experiment was an important radial dispersion of the temperature that could reach 30% between the center and the edge of the tank. This charge efficiency, the ratio between the cold energy that was released by the fluid and the cold energy that we recover in the storage media, was estimated to 80 to 85%, and the discharge efficiency was around 65%. So these experiments were very interesting to learn about this storage process. What we could see also is the long duration storage. Even if the thickness of insulation in this tank was 200 millimeters, the thermal losses were far from being negligible. During a long duration storage, an average of 40 or 4 degrees per hour of temperature could be observed. So during this storage phase, we could also measure an important temperature gradient between the top and the bottom, and because of the thermal losses through the wall between the center and the edge. So many results that were a little different from the simulation, and we could learn a lot from the experiments. So in the thermostor, in the final demonstrator, using the knowledge and all we could learn from the experiments, the prototype that is currently used in Frigologics is based on a vacuum insulated tank, to reduce drastically the thermal losses. The inlet fluid is now liquid air. It is sprayed at the top during storage. There is a first metallic section that evaporates the liquid air. The idea behind this is to have a much better heat transfer due to the evaporation heat transfer. And the second section is with glass beads. And during discharging, the air flows from the bottom to the top, releasing the cold energy stored in the glass beads and the metallic section. So liquid energy storage is an energy storage technology that generates heat and cold energy as subproducts. It's very important to recover the synergy, is to use it efficiently. The efficiency can be really highly increased by the use of thermostor to store and recover the thermal energy between charge and discharge. The temperature levels are a little problematic. It implies specific storage technology. Pack beds can be used and have been experimentally tested here in this project. And based on the experimental results presented here, we improve the design of the pack bed using different layers and different materials, including metal. So it is an innovative thermostor that is installed in the large-scale prototype. in order to reach a better efficiency, since it has a large impact on the global efficiency of the overall process. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Denny. Thank you very much for that. There's a lot of work done on the thermal storage and all the areas of the project, and we've only got 10 minutes to present this information in. So Denny did a fantastic job in actually presenting that within the times. But obviously within all these presentations, there's a lot more information. And I should mention as well that it's not in all cases, because there is some information that remains confidential, but nearly all the information from the project is available as deliverables, and you can find it on the website. So if you are interested in any particular aspect of the project, it's more than likely you can find more information about it on the website. So next, moving on to our next presentation for our short break, is from Gabriel Garcia, who's from SENA in Spain. He's going to be talking about the energy management strategies for Cryohub, because obviously to make or try and make Cryohub financially viable, we have to look at the management strategies and how they'd be controlled. So Gabriel, over to you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Gabriel Garcia. I come from SENA in Spain, and now I'm talking about what is the energy management strategy that we intended to make this Cryohub concept profitable. There's a short summary you can see here. First, I will explain a little bit about the applications at customer side of energy storage, how we build the energy management strategy in different steps, and finally the analysis of the expected performance of the system. So first of all, the energy storage system, it's a high investment. It's something costly that you install when you have a very good reason to do that. Well, so what are the main reasons or drivers for an owner of a plant to install such a system? I try to include them in 5 short points. First, increasing self-sufficiency with renewables, which is generally linked with a green-oriented strategy. Reducing the energy bill of the company, either through demand charge or energy charge or both. Applications which are related with thermal energy, support to refrigeration needs at the factory, use of waste heat, either from the factory to the liquid air system or vice versa in some cases, as you will see. Afterwards, providing grid services like demand response. There are some countries that are giving big steps ahead with this demand response or frequency regulation applications. And last of all, continuity of supply under weak grids. It's not an issue in Europe, but it can be a huge driver in different countries. So it's energy storage technology has different features. So you have to know what are those and use them wisely to have a good profit from them. Liquid air relies on industrial equipment and thermodynamic processes. So that means robust performance of the system and longer lifetime. It has a combined electrical and thermal operation to take into account. And in this case, we have a limited capacity for fast response because it's the system that takes some minutes to start up. These features have to be considered when we design the energy management, you will see in a moment. And an optimal electrical and thermal integration of this system in the plant to take advantage of everything you can. It's important for success. So which are the steps? The first one, and it's more evident to anyone, is to use excess renewable energy at your factory to store it and use it later. Of course, for that, the sizing of the renewable system should take into account that you're expecting to have this excess. Otherwise, in most places, the renewable system is the size versus the factory is that one to minimize the surplus energy, the excess. So in this case, which is the condition for profitability? your reference here is which is your peak tariff you're trying to fight against. In this case, the peak tariff should be higher than the use cost of your storage system to have an interesting case. The use cost is being simplistic as for that example. Let's take your investment cost and divide it between the cycle life of the system. So in this case, if we consider a 1 megawatt hour capacity, we would get a reference peak tariff of 40 euro per megawatt hour. Every time, if you're considering a new value of this excess generation that you're not getting paid or you're getting paid too low, in this case, you will have this reference. That means that with a lower peak tariff than 40, that system would not work for you. The second assumption would be this. The next step is to not use just this renewable excess, but also try to take advantage of night charging for these early hours of peak tariff in the morning. This triangle we can see here, and with this night charging of a system, be able to provide this energy. In this case, we are not working with a virtually free energy like in the previous case, but we have to pay for this energy. That means that we need to know now which is the difference between the peak tariff you will substitute with the energy discharged by your system and the energy cost that you charge in your system, but considering the round trip efficiency of your energy storage. In this case, we assume for this example, the 50%. So with these numbers, we would go, considering the 40 of the previous step, we would go to 80 euro per megawatt hour. So it's much higher. In this case, it's much more difficult to get a profitable case, considering the night charging, not just the excess virtually free energy as it is logical. But the third step for this is what happens if we completely charge the system during the night. That means that we will use just a little bit of this red line, which is the state of charge of the system. We will use just a little bit in the morning, and then we will very, very fast we'll get to this 100%, not being able to charge any other additional energy during the rest of the day. So the clever thing to do is, considering weather and low demand forecast for 24 hours, introduce that in an optimization program and charge the system during the night just to the point where you need. The optimal, in this case, is the one that you have enough energy to cover these first hours, and then you have full availability to charge as much as possible during the day. In this case, reaches 100% here, and there is an amount of energy that is not still able to charge, but this is that depends on the sizing of the system and so on. Of course, the seasonal variability and all these factors. This is another example of the same performance. These gray lines are the system charging, these gray boxes, and the orange ones are the ones when the system is discharging, and the gray ones when it's charging. So in this case, we are charging the system a little bit during the night, just up to a 60% state of charge or something like that. Then during the morning, we discharge the system a little bit and got this storage capacity for charging all the surplus renewables during the day. In this case, you see there are several start and stops during the day. We should minimize this because this is not a system that has a fast start and stop, and it's not very good for the equipment in general. So we should try to minimize this, include this in the optimization. So with these numbers, we would increase the use factor of the system from a 50% of the hours in the year for strategy 1 to 23 or even 33 in the second and third one for the liquefaction stage, and a similar number for the turbine stage. And last of all, I wanted to point out here what is the expected performance during the months. As we are relying on like energy, which will be the most common case, there is a huge difference between January, April, June, depending on the location and so on. So you can go from below 10 to plus 25 percentage of the energy in the peak tariff to be avoided. So as a conclusion, the round-trip efficiency, we saw that has a strong impact on profitability. It's more difficult than with other energy storage systems to get a profitable case with a 50% round trip, as we assumed in this case. And the second strategy we saw maximizes the night charging operation. That in principle would be good, but this approach limits the availability of the system for the rest of the day. So the third strategy maximizes the operation time of the system and the economic performance with using forecasts and using an optimization program. As it depends on these forecasts, of course, the reliability of the weather and demand forecasts are key to get a good overall performance. And in general, as a conclusion, is that this operation that we saw is not considering additional revenues that can come from these systems, and there will be really important to the profitability as providing services to the grid like demand response, frequency regulation, or of course other safety measures like not relying on a weak grid and be able to provide safety to your factory with such an energy storage system. So that was everything on my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Gabriel. It's really important, a lot of these points in how you can actually make a system viable. So thank you very much. We're now going to take a short break. So we're very slightly behind time, but we're still going to try and keep to time and come back at 12:35. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, have a quick walk around, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much indeed. You all had a good quick break, managed to grab a coffee, stretch your legs. I think the next session is really interesting because it's about the design and installation of the demonstrator. The first presentation is from Hank Fowler, who's representing Frigologics. I'd actually say at the start of the project, we didn't actually have a host for the demonstrator, and Frigologics offered to help us. So we owe a great deal of thanks to the owners of Frigologics and also to Hank, who has been marvellous support for the project in helping us get the demonstrator installed at Frigologics. So Hank, you're going to talk a bit about Frigologics, their environmental goals and sustainability at Frigologics, because it's a really important part, of the whole business. So Hank, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Judith. I'm talking a bit about Frigologics, and my name is Henk Fowler, and I was the project manager at Frigologics during this project, and I'm already working a few years in Frigologics. Frigologics is the storage and handling partner. Well, we talk a little bit about the next items. First, an introduction about what is Frigologics, then the sustainability of Frigologics, electricity consumption, and also future plans for the electricity supply, and then about the Cryohub test installation. Integrated logistics service center, that is how Frigologics sees itself. And it handles fresh and frozen products. It supplies complex processes for customers who are not able to do that themselves or to improve those processes. Value-added logistics are provided to the social employment and customer service. You see here some of the suppliers from Frigologics. The background of Frigologics is this one. It is established in 1998 and it has 3 locations, from which 2 in Belgium and 1 in France. There are around 70 employees, from which 55 in Belgium and 15 in France. And the Lommel presentation, where I talk later about, is in 24/7 operation, and in the other two plants there are day shifts. The total number of pallet places which Frigologics can store is around 60,000 deep frozen products and 5,000 fresh products. And the turnover in pallets per year is more than 1 million. Here you see the locations. Number one, the main location in Lommel is nearby the Dutch border. And the second one, that's in Herkestad, that's somewhere between Lommel and Brussels. And the third one you see in the north of France, that's in Montigny-le-Roi. I said before, the main plant and office are located in Lommel. Lommel has the capacity of a storage of 40,000 pallets with frozen products and 5,000 with fresh products. And they are divided over 8 cells for frozen products, 8 cells where you can differ in temperature which are required for the different products. And there is 1 cell for fresh products. There is a repacking area, and there is social employment and sustainability, and that I come back later. Also, is there customer service as a very important thing. There is a fuel delivery on site. A fuel delivery on site is a wish of customers to have a one-stop shopping possibility. It means, in fact, that before or after the loading of the trucks, a direct fuel loading can take place without going in somewhere in the city or around to drive extra kilometers and wasting time. There are parking places for trucks, and that is for overnight waiting or weekends, also to do that on the same spot without extra driving. There is the possibility for container and trailer cooling with EV boxes charging stations. The repacking and repair facilities by employment from sheltered workplace. That's the social behavior. The pallet flows in Lommel. About 75% of the pallets are coming directly from FarmFrieds. And FarmFrieds, that's the company which is directly connected to Frigologics. FarmFrieds treats potatoes, and these potatoes are transferred in products, and these products are stored in big pallets from about 1,000 kilogram each, and directly via a conveyor belt transported to the Frigologics system, and there internally distributed over the different cells. You see around 10,000 pallets which are stored from the other suppliers, and they are mainly stored in what you see as the white cell here on the screen. The sustainability at Frigologics. As Reinier van Elderen says, he is the director from the company, our vision is to create a cleaner world for the next generation. And to come a step ahead, it's important that there is a cooperation between universities, companies and authorities. It's necessary to find new sustainable technologies for our industrial sector. One of the solutions there is a triangle between producer, store, waste treatment without traffic and a return green electricity. I will show that in the next sheet. On the roofs are placed 4,200 PV panels, supplying about 20% of the electricity consumption from Frigologics. As said before, the EV boxes for electrical cooling and trailers and containers, and they are placed there to replace the traditional way of the diesel compressors, which supply cold with a lot of noise and pollution. This is a very clean solution. And what is, of course, the newest thing is the investigation, the effects of cryogen technologies. Electricity consumption. Frigologics consumes around 5 million kilowatt hours per year. On the roofs are placed 4,200 panels with supplying 1 million kilowatt hours per year, altogether around 20%. And still 4 million kilowatt hours per year have to be purchased from the grid. There is a possibility to put more panels on the roof, but that's only a minor extension. So this is not so important to do very useful things. So the best thing is to do the next one. In the future, we think about this possibility. As said before, FarmFried is connected to Frigologics, but there is also another connection, and that is the triangle between FarmFried, GreenLogic biogas, and Frigologics. The potato peelings, which is a lot of the potatoes, are pressed via high-pressure steam pipes to GreenLogic's biogas, and there this is transferred in green electricity. Nowadays, this green electricity is supplied into the grid, and the plans are to make a direct connection from GreenLogic biogas to Frigologics to deliver 4 million kilowatt hours of electricity. The total capacity of GreenLogics is higher. That's around 10 million, but only 4 million are needed nowadays. But if there are future extensions on the Frigologics side, which are planned, then we can use this electricity also for those extensions. Of course, it's important to keep a backup from the grid, because in case of emergency, you always need to have access to the network itself. In 2016, there was a discussion about finding a good place for the test location for Cryohub. And there were discussions if it was worthwhile to do this on the site. And then we discussed internally if it was possible and if we could find a place where we could build this location. And we found it in a corner of the just built new warehouse, where we could place such an installation without a lot of interference with the rest of the processes. And what you see on the small picture here is that you first have the skid, which we have seen before. You have the lin tank with the nitrogen, and you have the filling position of the with the supply of the nitrogen frequently. That's the outside business. But inside, that's what it's all about, that you have to supply cold. And you do that via heat exchangers which are placed inside the building. But as you can see, that there is a close connection between the outside skid and the inside heat exchangers. And here you see the picture of the total skid as you saw before. The heat exchangers in the freezing cell, which are generating the cold, are placed in the top of the racking, which is there. These are mobile rackings, both sides, but there's a stationary part in the middle. And in the top of that are placed the heat exchangers, as you can see a little bit here in this corner. And what is important is, of course, that that connection from the inside placed heat exchangers very close to the wall, and the outside piping, which is going directly to the skid, and that is as close as possible. You see that is a quite complex situation. Important is anyway that the impact on operation, operators and temperature is minimal for a warehouse, so that we have as few as possible disturbances in the daily operation. The building of the Cryohub installation itself on the site was in fact not too complex. The skid itself was completely delivered as a prefab unit made in Poland. Here you see the backside of the LIN container, which was a complete ready for use unit to place beside it. You see here the SPS cold storage container, very heavy one. And here for the rest you see the pipe work and the delivery of the containers and the assembly works. All the work together was done by a lot of suppliers, of course, for the delivery of the skid, but also on site to get everything done. We had a close cooperation with Domeyer in Poland, who supplied the skid and the piping work, SPS in the Netherlands, who delivered the thermal store, Deprag, who supplied the turbines, and with Air Liquide Belgium, who hired the LIN tank and delivered the hoses to make the connection to the skid. Topcold in the Netherlands. Topcold is the house supplier of Frigologics and is responsible for all the cooling and the ammonia network and did a lot of support in this project. Then we worked together with Kennis in the Netherlands, who did all the electricity supply and the cabling and make it possible to supply current back into the grid. And an important part was also delivered by EME in Belgium for the grid protection switchboard. In Belgium, it's not allowed to put just currency back into the grid because that can give disturbances. And to avoid those, you need the protection switchboard, and that's supplied by EME in Belgium. Isocap in Belgium is a supplier of roofs and isolated walls and roofs and material, and they made the holes in the wall and the closing are they doing after that the project will be finished. Bergmans in Belgium was responsible for the concrete flooring outside and the fencing and supporting the site work. Well, this was what the partners helped us and did us in having a successful assembly and starting of the operation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you very much. It's a really great presentation. And thank you very much for your help. We couldn't have done it without you. So continuing the theme of the construction, and now moving on to the next presentation, which is from Fabian van Dam, who's from Domeyer. Domeyer are also one of the partners that joined partway through the project. They actually took over the manufacture and build of the Demonstrator, which was built at their factory in Poland. You already saw a few slides from Hank about the build, but Fabian's going to talk a bit more about the installation. So pass over to the presentation from Fabian.
Good morning. Welcome to the webinar. This is the slides about Domeyer. Domeyer has a vast experience with cryogenic skids. This is a skid we've built in the past in Norway for LNG. And this is a skid we are installing on a daily basis in the nuclear power plants of EDF in France. Unfortunately, we have never done anything with the energy that comes available from the expanding gas. So for us, this project was new. It was innovative and it offered us the possibility to produce electricity with the power that is compressed in the gas. This is what happens in our workshop. The workshop is located in Poland, and we have there made the blue steel frame, all the stainless steel piping that is under high pressure and is also because of that X-rated. We did also the vacuum piping, the nitrogen pump, and the electrical integration. We have also combined a lot of new materials, and these were very challenging for us. So let me show you what new materials and components we have used. For example, the heat exchanger. The heat exchanger that had to exchange the cold from the liquid nitrogen or the gaseous nitrogen with the ammonia. It has never been built before, and it was a challenge to do the study and the engineering. We have looked at different types of coolants, intermediate coolants, and the type of heat exchanger. But this is the result. It's a heat exchanger where 3 streams of cold gas are going in, and 3 streams of cold ammonia gas are coming out. Another challenging material was the recirculation fan. At a certain moment in the project, we have decided that we would recirculate the warm gases to reheat and regenerate the cold storage. As the PNID was changing and the temperatures changed, we had to adapt our recirculation fans to a complete new temperature range that was commercially not available on the market. So we had to develop a complete new turbo compressor. This was another very big challenge for us to design and build such a turbo compressor. And then when everything was ready, we shipped it all the way from Europe to Europe, from Poland to Belgium. So it was a 15-hour travel with a skid and the heat exchangers all the way to Lommel at this final destination, where we could start with the installation. So arriving at Lommel, we had to erect all the components and put them together. So everything was already built in our workshop. So it was more kind of a puzzle we had to put together. But of course, we had to integrate it with the cold storage and we had to integrate it with the warehouse from Frigologics. So this is some pictures from during the installation where you can see that the people are connecting all the flanges and climbing onto it to work on the high heat exchangers numbers 2, 3, and 4. These are the turbines that have been covered with what we call our rain or snow covers. As you can see on the pictures, it was snowing those days, and this harsh weather conditions have made us deciding that we would better cover all our fragile components. What you also can see on this picture is that we have monitoring. We have infrared cameras and normal regular cameras. So we can, from distance, we can monitor temperature variations in the different components. You can see also on the picture the pressure sensor, the temperature sensors, and those blue things are the ball valves. The ball valves, 3-inch ball valves that control the flow of the gases. This is more or less when the Dolmeier part was finished. It had to be hooked up to the liquid nitrogen and had to be hooked up to the cold storage vessel. So what you can see here are the vertical pipes going up to the warehouse, the heat exchanger on the top, and under it the blue skid with all the components in it. A couple of days later, the cold storage has arrived, and the cold storage had been hooked up by flexible vacuum insulated hoses. So you see here in this picture the cold storage. You also see clearly that the ammonia installation is also hooked up. So we are almost ready for the last and final stage. This is the electrical cabling. It was more than a spaghetti of cables to integrate with Frigologics at one end, but also integrating all the different components and the cold storage, all to the one and only central electrical cabinet. On the pictures, you see some of the frequency inverters. We were huge because of the amount of electricity we produce. This is how it finally looked. This is completely finished. It was a late evening when we finished the installation, and we are now ready for testing. So the testing happened in 5 different phases. So first of all, the nitrogen has to be hooked up, as you can see at the right-hand side picture. We did a lot of I/O tests to make sure everything was wired correctly. There was a leak test to make sure everything was leak-free. And then we could start finally first with the functional warm test and later with the functional cold test. And these are some of the screenshots from what is happening during the commissioning phase. On this screen, you see the overview of the whole installation. Everything is on this panel. You can see at which pressure, at which temperature the individual stages are. You can see that the heat exchangers run at -50 and at -22. You can see the pressure all over the whole system. On the next slide is dedicated to the turbines. In this slide, you can see how much the turbines, under which pressure and under which flow the turbines are, as well as you can see how much nitrogen expressed in kilograms per hour we are pushing through those heat exchangers. On the next slide, we show more about the cold storage. You can see that the cold storage is generating or charging in charging modus is going down to -15.9 degrees with the temperature of incoming gas what is below -116. So we are charging the cold storage with cold energy that later can be used. This is my presentation. I give the word to the next presenter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Fabian. I should also perhaps mention as well, this was really quite a challenging build, and we really do need to convey thanks to Domar. I mean, we were building and installing this during a COVID pandemic, which made things extremely challenging. So I think it's really a reflection on Domar that they actually managed to complete the installation, and we actually have the demonstrator running, which really comes to the next presentation, which is from my colleague Alan Foster, who's going to be talking a little bit about the operational data from the demonstrator. So Alan, can I pass over to you, please?
Okay, hello everybody. Let me put it on the right. Hi. Okay, so my name's Alan Foster from London, South Bank University. Obviously, there's a lot of other people to credit on this, other people from LSBU, Daniele with his model, and all the other partners involved with gathering this data, too many to put on the presentation. So I'm going to be talking about just move that. The data that we gathered during the initial tests. So these are just initial tests at the moment. We've still got other tests to do. But also using the models that Daniele developed to extend the results that we've got to look further into what you would have if you had a more realistic system. Okay. For some reason it's sorry, it's not going through. Okay, so to start off with, we are looking at the round trip efficiency. So hopefully you understand what the round trip efficiency is from all the discussions from the other partners, etc. And we're looking, the round trip efficiency is the output power and the input power. So that's the power that you get out of it divided by the power that you put into it. So this first one is the actual data that we got from the equipment that we built, which is not the equipment that we intended to build due to the constraints that we had. So this is the real data that we had without any modeling. So we got 129 kilowatts of cooling to the warehouse. Now we have to look at what the value of that actual cooling is. So taking the COP of the ammonia refrigeration system as 2.5, that would be the equivalent of 51 kilowatts of electrical input to create that cooling to the cold store warehouse. And that cold store warehouse was running about minus 20 degrees C. And we had 40 kilowatts of electrical power from the turbines. So that's our output. And then what's the input? As it's explained before, we didn't have a liquefaction system. So liquid nitrogen was brought in and put into a liquid nitrogen vessel. So we have to assume what the energy cost of that liquid nitrogen is. So we're using it at 0.42 kilograms per second. And if you take an energy cost of 1.4 kilowatts per kilogram, you can see at the bottom the assumptions of what that liquid nitrogen system would be to give you that energy cost. That means there's 2.13 megawatts of power when it goes into producing that quantity of liquid nitrogen, and a very small amount of fan power to circulate the cold within the warehouse of 6 kilowatts. Put all those together and you get 4.5% round trip efficiency, which is obviously very small. But then you have to remember we don't have the liquefaction system and all the other things. So the point of this is to show what we've got. And then the next slides look at incrementally how you would build that up into something more sensible. This does include the electricity generated, the cooling to the warehouse fan power, but doesn't include defrost, startup and shutdown losses. Doesn't include interstage cooling from the turbines. As Daniele said in his model, there's about -30 to -40 degrees C comes off the turbines. So at the moment, we're putting this into ammonia heat exchangers and assuming this is of no benefit in terms of cooling. And also the liquid nitrogen is venting and is transport of the liquid nitrogen. So it doesn't include any of those things. But the further slides I'm going to look at, once you include these things, what benefit they have to the round trip efficiency. So, okay, so the original concept was we would recover the cold energy between the turbines. Not only do you recover the cold energy, but you have to reheat between the turbines. Otherwise, it gets progressively colder in between each turbine, which is not a good thing. And we were going to use a heat transfer fluid to do this and put this to a chilled warehouse. But what we found with Domeyer and the work that they did was that it was going to be too expensive to build heat exchangers that would do this. And the only things we could really afford was to use ammonia from the warehouse refrigeration system to reheat between the turbines. Okay, basically that's not really much of a benefit in terms of refrigeration. It's only a benefit in terms of reheating the turbines. So if we assume that we did recover the cold and we were able to transfer the heat from the turbines to the chilled warehouse, that would give us an additional 30 kilowatts of chilled cooling. Okay, but because the COP of a chiller is even better than a freezer, COP of 4, say at -10 degrees C, this increases our round trip efficiency marginally from 4.5 to 4.9%. So the next thing to look at is Daniele presented the design, our original design, and part of building it is to see what the difference between the original design is and what you actually get. So if we look at the pressures at different points around the system, we actually ended up getting slightly higher pressures than we anticipated, but very similar. So we don't actually have any negatives from that. But the turbine efficiencies were not as good as anticipated. We were expecting in the order of 70-80%, but we got in the order of 50-60%. So if we had the design turbine efficiencies that we originally anticipated, this would move us up from 4.9 to 5.5%. Once again, a marginal increase, but if you think about it, the power from the turbines is a small part of the equation, so increasing that doesn't have a massive effect. Another thing to look at is pumping to a higher pressure. We were constrained also in how high a pressure we can have because of the cost of heat exchangers, etc., pumps that go to higher pressures. So we're at 15 bar with a round trip efficiency of 5.5%. If you go to 30 bar, get 6%, 60 bar, 6.3%, and then 75 bar, it starts dropping. We're assuming a 25% pump efficiency, which is what we have. It's basically that poor pump efficiency, which is the reason why you tail off quite quickly. A higher efficiency pump would allow you to be able to pump at higher pressures and get better round trip efficiencies. Now, the really important thing, if we'd had, is having the liquefaction system. As explained by Daniele and also by Denis, it's very important to have the liquefaction system so that you can transfer the cold back to the liquefaction system. Okay, so if we were able to transfer the cold back to our liquefaction system, we're still running a 15 bar liquefaction system. The round trip efficiency goes up to 14%. So we've pretty well tripled the round trip efficiency by putting the cold back to the liquefaction system. So you can see how important that is. The cold is far more valuable at a low temperature. It's not very valuable to replace a very efficient ammonia system that runs at -30 with -150 degrees C air. It's much more efficient to replace the cooling of the liquefaction system. Okay, this is also making some assumptions about the cold energy storage efficiency of 91%. And at the moment, we're not. This doesn't assume recovered or waste or recovered heat from either the liquefaction system or anywhere else, which is the next slide. This slide incorporates two things. One is it's at 30 bar, so we're running at a higher pressure, which is a benefit as well, but also looking at recycling some of the heat back. Once again, as Denny said, you have to use stores because you're not liquefying and power generation at the same time. So all these are assuming a thermal store which transfers the heat. But if you had a liquefier and you were able to recycle all the heat from the liquefier at 230 degrees, you ended up with now an RTE of 31%. So this is getting to more reasonable values. If you have waste heat at 350 degrees, 38%, 550 degrees, 49%, 650 degrees, 55%, 750 degrees, 61%. So if you've got a lot of high temperature waste heat, waste as in you don't have anything else to use it for, then you can get very high efficiencies. It's possible that if you did have this high temperature, you would use something else to recover that heat. But if you're sharing the components using the turbines in this system, it can reduce your capital costs of making sensible use of that heat. So that's all basically, as you can see, what we've got and what we would have if we had a more sensible process and the equipment that we would have wanted if we could have afforded it in the project. So to draw some conclusions from this. So the demonstrator system, the round trip efficiency is clearly very low. And this is because the cost of the liquefaction is much higher than the energy production from the turbines and the value of the cooling to the cold store warehouse. So I said Daniele and Denny pointed this out in earlier presentations. So the ideal system, if we could do it and we had the money to do it properly, what would you do? Okay, you'd want to have a liquefier, and you want to reduce that liquefaction cost by recycling the cold back to the liquefier via a thermal store. This is where you get your biggest hit, really, the biggest benefit. But saying that, if you do have a cold store warehouse or whatever, or a facility where you are using cryogenic freezers, for example, maybe you are using liquid nitrogen to freeze, or CO2 or cascade systems, then there's a much bigger benefit now because you're replacing much more energy expensive cooling. So that's also ideal. And if you had the liquefaction system and those cryogenic freezers, you could get even bigger benefits. The next thing is increasing the power generation. Recycling heat from the liquefaction system via a thermal store is obviously a very important thing to do, and that increases your efficiencies a lot. And if you've got further high temperature process waste heat, you can put that directly into the system to create more power. Once you're generating lots of power with your turbines, then pumping up to higher pressures and having more efficient turbines, etc., increases your round trip efficiency further. Okay, so we're doing further work in this project. We've only just got initial results, but part of it is to look at the other things, the thermal store, the startup shutdown losses, defrosting of a liquid nitrogen heat exchanger, things like that. So there is more work to be done. This is very initial results. So thank you very much. Any questions, please either ask in the forum I think we have later, or give me an email.
Thank you, Alan. That was really great. We did have a few questions which were asking for more information after Daniele's presentation, but I think you've probably answered them. If people do want more information, pop a question in the box and we'll try and answer it. There is one question here, which is about whether Domi manufactured the turbines and fans, which is from Jorg Saar. The turbines, the original plan with the turbines was that they would be manufactured by one of the project partners, but unfortunately they went out of business, and so we had to source them elsewhere. And they were sourced from a company called Deprag in Germany. We actually had quite a problem finding a suitable turbine manufacturer. In terms of the fans, I assume you're probably asking about the recirculation fan that Fabian mentioned. That was made by a Domi partner in collaboration with them. Other fans that are involved in the Demonstrator obviously are fans on the heat exchangers, and they're reasonably ordinary off-the-shelf fans. So hopefully I've answered your question. Again, if I haven't, do pop a question in the question box. We're now moving on to the second polls and questions session with Carol, and then that will be followed by a discussion panel. Please, if you've got questions for the panel, do pop them in the question box and I'll include them in the discussion. So you've got a few minutes to be able to do that. In the meantime, I will pass back over to Carol, who will manage the second polls and questions session with Lisa.
Thank you, Judith. Thanks. Okay, so just a few questions in this second section. Exactly the same principle as before. So we'll put them up on screen and I'll read them out, and you've got a minute or so to respond. So Lisa, if you could put the first poll up, please. Okay, so the first question here is, what would encourage you to invest in Cryohub technology? And as before, we'd like you to choose two from the following options, please. So just the two. The first option is incentives for capital expenditure or operational running costs. The second is technology performance is proven. The third is there's a viable business case. That means a good return on investment or opportunities to input to the grid or avoiding peak prices, etc. The fourth one is straightforward integration with other processes and technologies. And the final one is improved carbon reduction or green credentials, if you like. So just to say those again, this question is about what would encourage you to invest in Cryohub technology, and please choose the two most important factors for you, please. And the choices are incentives exist for capital expenditure or operational running costs of the technology. The second one is the technology performance is proven. The third one is there's a viable business case, which means there's a good return on investment or revenue can be earned from selling electricity to the grid, or you're avoiding peak prices, etc. Fourth option, straightforward integration with other processes and technologies. And finally, improved carbon reduction credentials or green credentials for your business.
Okay, I think the majority of people have voted. I'll give you another 10 seconds and then we'll close the poll and show the results. So if you haven't voted, please do so now. Okay, I'm going to close that poll and share it.
Lovely. Oh, there's quite an interesting mix here. But the key one that's coming out on top seems to be a viable business case, so a good return on investment. Being able to earn revenue from selling electricity to the grid or avoiding peak prices, etc. So 64% of you put that as one of your key factors. At 40% was that the technology, the performance of the technology is proven. And then a third of you agreed that incentives exist, or existing incentives for capital expenditure and or operational running costs would be would encourage you, as would straightforward integration with other processes. And 20% of you felt that improved carbon reduction credentials would be encouraging. Thank you very much. That's excellent. We'll go on to the next one, please, Lisa.
Okay.
So that first question was about what would encourage you. What would discourage you from investing in the Cryohub technology? And again, we'd like you to select 2 from the following list of options, please. The options are the capital cost and or the operational running costs are too high. The technology is unproven. There's a weak business case. That means it could be a poor return on investment or limited value to be accrued from the market. There's a lack of integration with other processes, or no perceived benefit to the business from any potential carbon reduction. So I'll just run through those again. This is looking at the opposite to the last question. What would discourage you from investing in the Cryohub technology? And we want you to select 2, please. So the first one is capital cost and or operational running costs are too high. The technology is unproven. There's a weak business case, which means either a poor return on investment or limited value from the market. Lack of integration with other processes, or you don't feel there's any benefit to the business from potential carbon reduction.
Okay, I'm going to give you maybe another sort of 20 seconds just to complete the poll. We still have people voting, so make sure that you get those votes in.
So again, think of the things that are the key factors to you, the 2 key factors of those 5 options there that would discourage you.
I'm going to close the poll in about 5 or 6 seconds. So if you haven't voted, please do so now.
Lovely, thank you. So we've got actually 2 very clear options here. That if the capital cost and or the operational running costs were too high, that would be a discouraging factor, as would a weak business case. So a poor return on investment or limited value potential from the market. Unproven technology was important to a third of respondents there. And perceiving no benefit to be accrued from the business, the potential carbon reduction was important to 20%. Lack of integration, less important, it seems, on this one. Okay, thank you very much. And then the final 2 questions, again, reasonably brief questions, these. So if it was available now, how interested would you be in investing in Cryohub technology? So this is a kind of what if, really, question. If it was available now, right now, how interested would you be in investing in Cryohub technology? And we really just want one answer here, and it's a graduated scale, as you can see. Are you not interested at all? You've got no strong opinion one way or the other, so you're neutral. You're slightly interested, you are interested, or you're extremely interested. So if it was available now, how interested might you be in investing in Cryohub technology? Not interested in the slightest, pretty neutral, no strong opinion either way, slightly interested, interested, or extremely interested. So if you could just select one of those, that would be really fabulous.
Okay, I think the majority of people have voted on that already, so I'm just going to give you another 10 seconds, and then I'll close the poll. Okay, so if you haven't voted, please do so now. Okay, I'm going to close that poll for you, Carol, and share the results.
Okay, so very few people aren't interested at all. We've got a few, about 13%, with no particular strong opinion. They're fairly neutral. Slight interest from 22%. Almost half of everyone that responded said they were interested, and 17% extremely interested. So actually, that's coming in at 60% overall, I think. Well, in fact, 82% have some interest, which is a very interesting result, and thank you for that. Which leads us to our final question. So our final question is, if it was available, that was if it was available now. if the two factors that had discouraged you before, 2 questions ago, you mentioned 2 factors from a list of 5 that would discourage you. If they were overcome, how interested would you be investing in Cryohub technology? So the same question, but just assuming that the things that were discouraging you before were actually overcome. So could you, again, just mark 1? Would you be not interested? Again, no strong opinion, neutral about it. Slightly interested, interested, or extremely interested. So again, just mark 1, but imagine that the things that you'd put down before as potential discouraging factors were actually no longer in play.
Okay, we've got about 50% of our audience have voted, so we'll give it a bit longer to make sure that we give everyone the opportunity to put those votes in. So I'm going to close the poll in about sort of 10-15 seconds. So please make sure you get your votes in if you haven't already done so. Okay, I haven't seen anything come through on the voting in the last couple of seconds. So like I said, I'm going to give you 2 more seconds and then we'll close that poll.
Okay. So I think we probably have a slight increase, in fact, 60, 78, 88. Yeah, and we do actually, we have an increase. So actually, if those discouraging factors were taken away, there would be more people that would be leaning towards either slightly interested, or extremely interested in investing. So I think it's fair to say that there was actually quite a high figure, even with some discouraging factors in play. So that's really encouraging feedback. Thank you very much. And thanks for all your interaction with the polls today.
Thank you very much, Carol. I hope it's been useful. Thank you everybody for contributing to the polls. We're now moving on to the discussion panel. This is really a discussion on liquid air energy and energy storage. So if you've got some questions, please do send them in. I've got some ready prepared questions which I can draw on to discuss with the panel. But if you've got anything you would like to ask, please feel free to do so, and I'll try and draw it into the discussion. So I'd like to introduce our panel for this afternoon. We have Dr. Alexander Alexiev from Linde Technology, Dr. Philip Lebrun, who's the Honorary President of the International Institute of Refrigeration, Mohamed Youbi Idrissi, who's from Semaphore. Very interestingly, Mohamed was at the initiation of the project. He was actually working for Air Liquide at the time and was one of the project initiators. So it's nice to see you back at the end as well, Mohamed. Very unfortunately, Jeremy Miller has been called away to a work emergency, and so he's not available, and so I'm afraid we've lost him from the panel, which obviously is disappointing, but perfectly understandable as well. And we've got Professor Tatiana Morkujuk. I'm sorry if I've mangled people's name, from the Technical University of Berlin. I wanted to talk a bit about, liquid air and energy storage and its future part of the grid, and what your views were surrounding that area. What do you see as the options that are most likely to be commercialised? Do you think liquid air is part of the mix, and what other technologies might also be applied? I don't mind who we go to first. Shall I go to you, Tatiana? Because I'm worried that you may have to go, so I'm trying to get.
Yes, I'm very much sorry. I have administrative meeting that I cannot postpone. I really oversaw the time. Yeah, I apologize.
No problem, but I'll try and draw you in first so that we get a chance to get
I can tell you,
your experience.
Yeah, thank you. At present, we should discuss about all options for the storage, because we never know which option will be better for which operation conditions, for which temperature, for which application. Because I think at present we mainly will discuss about distributed storage. So definitely we cannot have one big storage, for example, within the country, even if country is not so big. We need to discuss different options for storage. And by my opinion, any sort of cryogenic storage would have some sort of technical meaning, but first of all, we need to discuss about economical feasibility. This is absolute sure, and as today already Paul showed us that many people are very much with concern regarding the economical feasibility of this system. From this point of view, I think that we already proved technology is working. This is absolutely clear. So now how to improve efficiency? Of course, we can do quite a lot of simulation data, this is for sure, but simulation sometimes cannot reflect the real system. From this point of view, I think that will be very useful to continue with the project and to run many experimental possibilities to improve the system, not only from the point of view of simulation. I mean, that system should run, definitely. Because I know that now several research groups that are working with liquid air storage, they move it to deep investigation of the processes, so they're fully focused on experiment, they're out of simulation, and they try to improve heat transfer characteristics of components, because the biggest amount of irreversibilities, or who is familiar with exergy analysis, I can say exergy destruction, caused by heat transfer components. And my research group would try to work with Linde, for example, with 3 streams heat exchangers or multi-stream heat exchangers. This is closed information. Companies never will give us this information because it's commercial information. And this is understandable. It is not criticism, of course. But if we have such a unique experimental already, I don't know, it is test plant, of course it is not pilot plant. It is test plant, is it possible or not somehow to obtain different data in different operation conditions? And maybe some of research group can do it quite professionally, because in this moment should be very, very deep knowledge in experiment. I mean, not only to prove technology, I'm discussing about long-term running to find out heat transfer characteristics, because this development of new turbine, this is also interesting, but it is mechanical engineering, and I'm discussing about internal improvement of system that we can find if we really have technical limit, or this technical limit now associated only because of it is test plan. And if it will be large plant, it can be something different. So this is my, so it is my wish. Of course, if possible, to continue with the project, I will be very happy to be, not me, I mean my research group, yeah, will be very happy to be a partner for that, because I think there are some possibilities to improve the system and to demonstrate feasibility of the system. And if you allow me, I would like to make a very short criticism related to questions that we got during the polls. Capital investment and running costs are not interesting to anyone. Interesting only the cost of the final product. So, and where, if it is storage, we need to find the cost of the final product. And if cost is reasonable, okay, maybe running cost will be very high, or maybe capital investment will be very high. It is irrelevant. The most relevant, it is final product. And if final product will be cheaper, we will have something in hands to persuade to use our technology. This is the only what we're always discussing with our students, to persuade investors to invest money, to persuade politicians to support the idea. It is the cost or environmental impact of the final product. In this moment, we will have very good arguments in our hand.
That's very interesting
Yeah.
view. Thank you very much, Tatiana. Alexander, I mean, maybe I'd like to also, you
yeah, can I give a couple of
but
comments?
also on, what you see as being energy storage in the future of the grid. Is it liquid air? Is it something else? Is it a mix? What are your views?
Yeah, really, I have a positive impression about the cryogenic energy storage. The competition is a battery-based energy storage, but if you look on the performance, of course, the battery storage has a high efficiency. But if you think about the high capacity, so megawatt range, gigawatt range energy storage, they are not so much technologies. They are hydro pumping, they are probably compressed air storage. Both this storage kinds requires a special geography. And if you say what's at the end, at the end is the liquid air energy storage, that single technology able to provide storage capacities in gigawatt range. They are competing with the natural gas-based peaker, competing with the coal-based power plants. And if you look what's the situation in Texas, just roughly 3-4 weeks ago, where the complete power system was out of operation for weeks, then I think in this situation, the technologies like cryogenic air energy storage or liquid air energy storage, they will be very, very helpful. And therefore, I think that such a technology have a future. We need such a systems for the sustainable future. That is very shortly my view.
Thank you very much. And Mohammed, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just I would like to start my feedback to remember the initial idea of this project. The initial idea was to use the liquid air energy storage. The reason why is simply because we are convinced that all technogrid exist in industrial application, and the innovation of this project was to put together several technogrids together and to optimize the whole system to provide something interesting. I remember also, because I was a member of the team, that at the beginning of this project, we have this discover that in fact the liquefactor of liquid air exists in the market, but in terms of capex it's very higher, or in terms of capacity we have some things much higher than what we need for the demonstrator. This is the reason why in your project, after many years, the demonstrator was used liquid nitrogen versus liquid air. So from my point of view, this is why this is one of the key constraints if we want to go tomorrow to this technology. How we can reduce the capacity of liquefactors, how we can found in the market liquefactors with a very acceptable ratio of capacity and cost. So this is a very higher constraint, and maybe industrial like Linde, Air Liquide, or other gas company can answer this question. So this is my first remark. The second one, and I agree with Professor Morzak about what is the right option for energy storage, generally speaking. At the beginning, this project, imagine that the Technobricks exist, but after 5 years, today we have maybe other options on the market, especially for hydrogen storage or hydrogen as a vector, energy vector for the future. So my question is, we need to understand what is the best option between I recover the energy from renewable energy and I store this energy via liquid, air liquid, or another energy vector like hydrogen, for example. And if I have some heat waste up to 350 degrees C, what is also the best option if I store this energy in a hot vector, or I recover them directly to electricity via OCR cycle, for example. So so as a next step for this project, beyond the necessary of to make more demonstrator, and I agree with that, we need to have more experience, more more experience and more data to understand and to optimize the system itself. But we need also to make this comparison between a liquid air option and other option coming in the market maybe more quickly.
Thanks, Mohammed. And Philippe,
yes.
would you like to add something to the discussion?
Yes. First, let me say that I'm quite admirative of the actors of this project for having brought the demonstrator to reality and tested them within the constraints of schedule, budget, and the pandemic. I think we should not be deterred by the rather low values of RTE, of round-trip efficiencies, which have been quoted. In fact, the bottom line of this is that we are using liquid air or liquid nitrogen at 80 Kelvin to produce refrigeration in cold storage at -18 or -5 or God knows what. So it cannot be thermodynamically so efficient. And for a self-contained cryohub, that is a cryohub which generates is its own, including for a cryohub which would generate its own liquid nitrogen. But I don't think this is the issue, honestly, and I don't think the way to go is to add up nitrogen liquefier to the system. Today, from the point of view of society at large, and not from a self-contained cryohub, from the point of view of society at large, there is today an excess of liquid nitrogen, which is a byproduct of the liquefaction of air, and the production of liquid oxygen. So, in fact, the way, according to me, to go ahead is really to tap this excess of liquid nitrogen produced industrially by society to run the type of cryohub which you have been testing on the demonstrator, and then use totally different estimators for the efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the emphasis on the project was to put components together and to show that they worked rather than to produce something that had, well, we obviously hope to get the highest round trip efficiency that we could. we didn't
No, but
intentionally
from this
try and
point of view,
get a low rank.
from this point of view, recovering both the heat energy, that is the cold, and the and making your nitrogen under pressure produce mechanical work is certainly a very good thermodynamic approach. I think the whole question is how do you produce the liquid nitrogen? And today, again, it's not Cryohub, but today society produces liquid nitrogen in large excess of the needs, and it's essentially on off-peak electricity hours. So for me, it is a resource which just needs to be tapped, and be tapping it in the type of Cryohub systems which you have tested on the demonstrator is certainly a very good way. But then you should not use the same efficiency estimators as the ones you have been using.
So, Alexandra, would you like to comment on that? Because do you think long term, moving forward, that a lot of liquid nitrogen is going to be on the market? It's going to be cheap and available. Do you think that's something we should be considering more?
You say discussion is more about techno-economics, overall techno-economics, how to get the cheap liquid nitrogen and all that. Yeah, therefore, I think it was really good approach to have in this team not the engineers only, but the economists or people understand in business models and how the power market work it on. That's I think it's a good idea, because the engineers, they are focused always on round trip efficiency and so on. But the business works in other way, and that is a good approach. Yeah, I think that there are two ways. The first is direct, straight engineering way to increase performance of the system, the overall performance of the system, by using better hardware components, turbines, heat exchangers, storages. That is the first way, and the second is really to find the use case where you can get access to a cheap nitrogen, like Philip means, and how that is always the trade-off. You would like to buy cheap energy and to sell it for at high prices. And that's, I think that to find out this use case where this relationship is okay, as you can get cheap power and you have enough demand for high price power. That is the second aspect. And I think that there are two this aspect, the economics, and to find the right use case and and the technology. Then in composition, you can get in combination, you can get the right business case. And if you look on your, because you started this questionnaire, and was interesting, the output, because people say, yeah, we are interested in high return on investment and positive business case, etc. How you can achieve it, yeah, but the best technology and the best use case. That is, I think, the key.
I think, Tatiana's point was that, a lot of it was based on, the cost of the system, and, that we had to bring down the cost of the system. So, maybe, there's some people are saying that's perhaps not the most important thing. Is that, am I interpreting what you're saying correctly? Because it's a little bit, Tatiana, you're very convinced that it's the cost that's very important, and that does seem to be borne by quite a lot of the work we do, that people are very interested in how much something costs still, although we are beginning to see people are more interested in the environment, and people like Frigologics are actually ahead of the game in a way, because they've been working on trying to be sustainable and energy efficient and low carbon for years now, but not all companies are like them.
But if you hook up a nitrogen liquefier onto your Cryohub system, it will never be as capital cost efficient nor energy efficient as the huge air separation plants, several hundred tons per day, which produce liquid nitrogen. So again, for me, the way you were forced to do it for this demonstrator is the way to go. Don't produce your own nitrogen. Let the economy produce its own liquid nitrogen in the best possible way, with the minimum capital cost per kilo, and with the minimum energetic cost that is running the air separation plants as they are run today in off-peak hours, and the cold storage being provided just by the liquid.
No, you're right. Obviously, a large plant is more efficient. Although my understanding, Alexander, you and Mohammed, you feel free to contradict me, but my understanding is there's a big difference between older and newer plants. And new plants can be a lot more efficient than older plants. But one of the ideas that we did have when we've been talking around the concept is, maybe a cryohub system would be better suited next to, a big liquefaction system, so that you're using excess nitrogen production when it's not necessarily needed, but it's the storage is actually close to the liquefaction system. What are your views on that? I mean, Tatiana, perhaps you could comment on that, because I want to get as much of your benefits before you leave.
Yeah, I'm taking the time. So we always discuss the same. The higher capacity of the plant, the cheaper the product and the higher the efficiency. This is absolutely correct. Therefore, we always discuss about cryogenic storage only in very large capacities. In small capacities, definitely we will not win much. We will only lose with such a storage. And therefore, this idea of Mr. Lebrun to assume that nitrogen is already coming to us, somehow produce it, so using, of course, economical benefits, and only to use liquid nitrogen for other purposes, this is absolute good idea, and I assume that economically feasible idea. And one comment, when we discuss about sustainability, it is not only environmental issue. Sustainability, it is efficiency, it is cost, and this is environmental issue. Unfortunately, people are not discussing about cost very often. First of all, it's quite difficult to estimate the cost, because cost really can be only estimated. It is disclosed information of big companies, and we can only predict the cost. We cannot really calculate. And from this point of view, it will be very interesting, for example, to calculate the product unit cost that is coming from the demonstration plant. At least in this moment, we will have somehow the highest value, because demonstration plant is of low capacity, so automatically cost, of course, will be more expensive, but at least we will have some value that we know how to proceed. This is what is related to economic analysis, and the same with environmental impact. Since all materials of plant is very good known for you, because you know components, you know equipment and so on, we can calculate even environmental impact of the product. So from this point of view, the data that you can subtract from the running plant can be much more extended, not only efficiency, not only thermodynamic efficiency, but also cost and environmental impact for the testing plant. And from this perspective, you can already discuss about sustainability. So how to improve which parts can be replaced if we will go to large scale, or small scale, of course, it's impossible, only to large scale. So I think Mr. Alexeyev can definitely estimate which materials can be changed to the more, so to cheaper and more environmentally friendly materials. I mean, not high alloy steel, low alloy steel, something like that. But from this point of view, of course, should be very good evaluation of the already existing plant. So existing plant will give us a lot of information how to improve. So this is my comment.
Thank you. Mohammed, is the next your liquid?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting.
Okay.
Thank you very much for all presentations. Unfortunately, I'm leaving.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you very much for your input. It's great to see you.
Thank you
so
very
much
much.
for being involved. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Mohammed, as liquid, the sort of idea of having a big liquefaction plant and maybe either having an energy store by it or taking the excess nitrogen. How does that sound to you? Does that sound something that could happen now, or is it got to change in terms of tariffs and policies and maybe how even liquid cryogenic companies think and act?
I have a remark. I agree with Philippe. Then from energetic point of view, when we have a large ISU, we have energy cost for liquid nitrogen production very, very lower. But just remember that in air separation unit, we put energy for liquefied and distillation between nitrogen and oxygen. And we have about half of energy for liquefaction and half energy for distillation. The idea to use liquid air is to have some things 50% cost energy by using simply the liquid air, so the mix of oxygen and nitrogen, with half energy demand. So this is the idea basically. And another point, if we use the excess of liquid nitrogen and we need to find the best business case for that, I agree with Alexander, but not forget that we need energy for transport, and depends on the point of production of liquid nitrogen and the point of use. And it's necessary to make this exercise to find some business case can be matched with the energy. But basically, to have a liquefactor inside a proximity on the hub of application, not only cold stores, but maybe other application for food industry, generally speaking, for example, can be also for refrigerated transportation, can be also for other activities, can be a good idea. So for me, this project can be a success if we extend the number of applications, not only for cold stores, but for other application around a hub of applications, and the perimeters may be of 10 kilometers or more, and we massify the applications with one liquefactor. In terms of availability of liquefactors in the market, I cannot answer this question today because industrial have their agenda and depends on the market. So today, the market it's more for LNG liquefactors or hydrogen liquefactors. The liquid air demand it's not very higher, at my opinion. So if we have more and more demand, and if we make demonstration that liquid air is the best option, maybe industrial can make some things, because the technology is mature. So it is a question for me of the market.
I think possibly you can only make the case it's one of a number of energy storage technologies. It's probably not going to be the only one. But do you see that things have got to change? Because at the moment, maybe tariffs are not variable enough to encourage people into using energy storage. Maybe some work's needed on the technologies themselves. Maybe it's still too easy to use other technologies and some policies required. Where do you see the sort of main drivers? Is it going to come from the market, or is it going to come from governments?
For me?
Whoever wants to take it.
I believe on the market, for me.
On the market.
Yeah,
Okay.
generally, we have. I think the market power is much more larger, and if market works, you have a really push behind. In some cases, the regulation or regulation control plays an important role. I think, for example, this case in Texas for 1 month, I think that is an example where the regulation didn't work at all. The Texas was simply commercialized as a renewable. It was a power of use, and you have just to afford this power. And you see at the end that its pure market was not really good for this. Yeah, it is always a combination. I think there will be some regulative impact, but I think the companies at the end who will invest in build such storages, that will be industrial companies. The main driver behind is the good techno-economics, that is ROI or business case, and therefore I think that the business case is an important thing.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that driver is going to come from sort of grid operators who are going to put in energy storage to cope with the variable renewable demand, or do you think it's going to be private operators that see an opportunity, or cryogenic companies, for example, that see a big opportunity and go for it?
Yeah, I think that they are. If you look on the techno-economics, you are using, or in the presented version, the techno-economics was based on the so-called arbitrage business model. You buy cheap energy in the night or during the day and sell. That is a direct way to make a business. But I think there are a lot of other models based on services for grid stabilization. For example, if you see the frequency is not stable, you can put your storage and stabilize. The second kind of, you can get a fee or money for just for be ready to stabilize your grid if it becomes not stable. I think that's not only arbitrage. You have to monetize all your capabilities as a black start ability, then your readiness for stabilization. And arbitrage is of course important because that's a direct way to make money. But I think that if you look at this cryogenic energy storage is able to create more value than arbitrage only. Yeah? And if you sell this value, then I think that's a better business case, of course.
Mm-hmm. But who's going to drive that? Is it going to be the grid operators? Because they're not.
That's different from country to country. Yeah. In Texas, they are private grid operators.
Yeah, definitely. Which is why
Texas was private grid operator.
Yeah, in the project. Philip, you want to say something? Sorry,
I tend to agree with Mohammed and Alexander that in fact the arbitrage should come from the market, but maybe with some incentives from the government or from grid operators. I think, in all these projects or attempts to use, in fact, to store energy and to smooth out, in fact, the peaks of demand, a key element is the ratio of the cost of peak energy over off-peak energy. And this is controlled primarily by the grid operators, but it could also be controlled partly through incentives by the government, because I think everyone has an interest to smooth out these peaks, not only for questions of quantity of electricity, but as Alexander mentioned, also the quality, the fact that on peak demand, if you load the network at its close to its capacity, you start to have frequency drifts. And then you may have complete blackouts, which sometimes, unfortunately, occurred. So I think, again, I mean, all these attempts, including Cryohub, to make use of energy storage will depend a lot on the ratio of peak over off-peak energy costs.
Mm-hmm. It's a sort of difficult challenge because, you know, these systems need a lot of investment. And at the moment, you know, possibly there isn't enough incentive there from the grid or from operators. And it's difficult to see in the future, you know, how things will move and making the right move. So if you were wanting to invest in large scale energy storage, it's difficult to know when, you know, you should make that move. I mean, Mohammed, do you want to add anything to the comments from Philippe and Alexander?
Yeah, once we discussed what the best geography for in the energy storage, and it's always around the islands, like I don't know, Fuerteventura or
Creta, that's a really good point. Yeah.
UK is not probably not an example of Ireland like this. If you have a local grid that's in UK case, you have a simply huge grid, large grid, and it's all. But if you have a medium-sized grid, if you have a limited generation capacities and capabilities, and a lot of renewables, that's, for example, in Spain, you have a lot of renewables, wind and solar, and so that is a kind of good basis for energy storage. And then the values, this grid stabilization ability, black start ability, this arbitrage or the efficiency, that can be transferred into the positive business case. Therefore, I think, and plus if you have an incentive by governmental institution, plus if you have a private grid operators, if they are able to pay this extra cost, that it may work.
It's just an area, we sort of considered within the project, because if you're in Europe, you know, there's potential to move energy, you know, across borders, and there's quite a lot of projects that are working on that at the moment. But if you're a small island, you know, you've got to do everything yourself. So it is an interesting area. We're sort of getting towards time when I need to wrap up, but we have actually got a question that's been sent in. So I'm just going to read that out to you and get your opinions on that. And then just ask if you've got any final points. In fact, there's two questions. This is from Juan Pablo Morea. He says, I've got two questions for the panel. Where should the industry focus to provide competitive long duration energy storage using liquid air? And number two, how realistic is it to assume that liquid air energy storage can be a valuable energy carrier able to compete with gas peakers? Not sure. Do you understand what gas peakers mean?
I know that's a simple gas turbine based planes, natural gas turbine.
Demand, to peak demand times, so panel, any comments on that one? Mohammed, are you still there?
No, please, Alexander.
You are still there. It's all right.
I think you should answer for the gas vendor. I mean.
I will give a comment
Anybody wants
because
to jump in on that one or two?
I think we calculated once the economics of gas pickers because that's a very simple device. It's just a gas turbine. You put the natural gas, combust the natural gas. The efficiency is 20+%. Usually, it's not the fuel gas is not integrated. It's not integrated combined cycle. It's just a gas turbine, and usually they are not so huge gas turbines. They are relative small, some small plants, they have not so huge efficiency. And I think the liquid air energy storage with claimed efficiency of 50-55%, what some companies are claiming now, can compete with gas pickers already. In the gas pickers is the second thing, you need a natural gas. So if you have a cheap natural gas, probably it's only capital investment. But if you have a prices for natural gas like 5 years ago, and plus investment in this gas picker, that liquid air energy can compete with this technology. I would please excuse me because I have to go to the next meeting too.
Yeah, okay. I'm just about to wrap up very soon anyway.
Yeah, Philip, was nice to see you here.
Yeah, it was nice to see you and Mohammed as well.
Thanks,
Mohammed. Thank you, Alexander. I just wanted to ask if anybody had any last comments that they wanted to make because we are due to wrap up at this moment. So anything else that you'd like to add to the discussion?
Yeah, just again, the business case is key to found the right situation and to make demonstration that this solution of liquid air energy storage is the best solution to propose. So it is necessary to make this exercise before to go to the next step.
Thank you, Mohammed. Philip, was there anything you wanted to add?
No. I think I've expressed all what the remarks which were triggered by the presentations. Again, thank you for the presentations, which were very interesting.
No, thank you very much. There were some really interesting points. Thanks for your points, Philip and Mohammed, for joining us again. It's really nice to see you.
Thank you.
And also to Alexander and Tatiana as well. I wanted to thank you really very much for being part of the panel and the interesting discussions. I also wanted to just thank all the presenters as well today, all the partners in the project, because as you can imagine, it's been challenging to build a demonstrator during a COVID pandemic and actually to make it work. We're still carrying on testing and we'll do as long as we can to get more data. So it's really been a lot of work from the partners and people really have gone beyond to be able to get this up and running. So I wanted to thank everybody very much for all their hard work. And thank you very much for everybody who's joined us today as part of the audience. Thank you for interest in the project. If you do have any more questions, I think everybody gave you links to their emails. And as we've said before, information's available on the website. This webinar will be available and also the presentations as well. So if there's anything that we can help you with, please do get in contact with us. We're very interested to talk to people about the technology. So I think I'm going to draw it to an end there. Thank you very much, everybody. And good afternoon. Hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.